Go live. We are live from the MGM Grand Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Wow, that lighting looks great. Shout out to the key light. Shout out to Elgato who makes the key light, I guess. I don't know how big of a company they are. They're a huge mega corporation or not. Either way, their workers make good lights. High quality, great use value. We'll wait for some people to filter in, and then I'll just start rambling on about these here books that I want to talk about. Sup, dude? Sup, bar kitty? Bar kitty? My voice cracked there. He rage quit. Hola. Who rage quit? Me? I'm here. That's good. I like that someone's using hola. Yo estudio español. Voy a un I don't know, como se dice trip. I don't know. I'm going on a trip soon. Super secret as of now, but to a Spanish-speaking country. Oh. So I'm pumped about that. And I've been studying Spanish. No, I debated Hunter Avalone this morning and he rage quit. Oh, really? Dude, I challenged that guy to a debate on TikTok forever ago and he didn't answer. That was before the TikTok got. Now our TikTok is getting back up to not as many followers as we had before, obviously, but it's up to like 40,000 or whatever, 44,000, I think, this morning. But I think I called out Hunter Avalone before we were back up into those like numbers. So I think maybe the reason that he didn't want to do the debate was because he didn't think we had a very big channel or whatever. So you have to press him really hard to respond. He's afraid of tankies. I mean, that makes sense. A lot of people in the West aren't even exposed to like tanky arguments at all. You know, a lot of people haven't even dealt with someone like that who's gonna like defend Cuba and existing socialism and point out like the role of imperialism and suppressing existing socialist countries and revolutionary movements and the role of U.S. financial warfare and preventing these countries from developing themselves, or the role of the U.S. media in lying about these countries, when in fact a lot of them have developed themselves even in the face of imperialist aggression. A lot of people haven't even heard arguments like that, and people like, that's why I wanted to debate Hunter. I'm like, that person, that's someone who's used to debating conservatives. They used to be a conservative, and then they became a liberal. So now they're like, because I used to be a conservative, I can point out all the holes in conservatives' arguments. But it's like, what about a tanky? What about an actual scientific socialist? His chat couldn't decide whether to call me Haas, Jackson Hinkle, or Caleb Moffman. Right. All people who just like mostly repeat very basic Marxist-Leninist principles. Haas and Caleb go more in depth into the theoretical stuff, but people who call themselves Marxist-Leninists are like, will like accuse you of being a tanky red-brown if you say like normal Marxist-Leninist stuff. Didn't Hunter Avalone used to be a conservative? Yes. Long live socialism, you bet. Eddie, would you recommend starting a cpusa chapter? The only party near me is the DSA. Yeah, but it's hard. Like, I live in a pretty populated area, in an area with like 5 colleges. And really I should put some more work into it, because I would be able to do it if I really, really put some effort into it. But I've been trying to start a cpusa club in my area. And I haven't found, you need like 3 people, including yourself, to do it. I haven't been able to find 3 people. And I have group chats with a lot of socialists, right? But everyone's busy, everyone works, and then, getting people to do something. And anybody who's organized in any capacity will tell you this. Getting people to commit to something verbally is a lot different than getting them to actually commit to it and do it. So, it's like, guys, let's start a CPUSA chapter here. And then they're all like, yeah, you get like 10 yeses. And then, then you send the link for people to sign up or whatever so you can get it done. And nobody does that actually, and then you forget to follow up with people individually because you're busy, and it tends to be how it goes, which is not. I'm mostly just making excuses for myself right now. What I need to do is get into those colleges, or really target people who I know would sign up for the CPUSA chapter and be like, all right, we're actually doing this, and be persistent and follow up with them. Now I'm kind of getting inspired to do that again. But yeah, it's definitely worth it to start a chapter or a club in your area. So you don't even need to start a chapter with CPUSA. So this is actually a good question. It'll be good to go in depth on this a little bit. You don't even need to start like a CPUSA chapter. If you have more than 3 or more people, you can start a club. So like that'll, you'll have connection to the central CPUSA, and their resources and stuff like that. But the club will be, just CPUSA in your area. And you can name it something specific to your area, like if there's some famous labor leader or something, or some famous strike, or I don't know, some famous socialist from your area, you could name the club after them. Famous civil rights leader, anything like that. So you can kind of make it specific to your locality there. Yeah, shout out CPUSA. Thoughts on the deprogram? I think they're pretty good. I definitely have like criticisms of them. Like obviously, like I have criticisms of anybody who you actually listen to and think about what they're saying, or you should have criticisms of pretty much anyone you actually listen to. So yeah, I don't know, but they're mostly good though. They're like Hakim is a Marxist Leninist, and second thought I've always thought is basically like ML, or at least an anti-imperialist. And but I've seen people like completely disavow them and say they like suck, or they're like rad libs. And I guess I don't agree with that, but I would like to see people's evidence, or why, the reason why some people say that. I don't really get it. Yeah, the debate with Hunter Avalon was the myth of red-brownism. That's so annoying. That's so annoying. And like, historically, the red-brown alliance or whatever has mostly been the Social Democrats. Like, it was Social Democrats who worked together with the fascists to kill Rosa Luxemburg in Germany. Which ultimately, not just the killing of Rosa Luxemburg, but that alliance, allowed fascism to rise in Germany and hit Adolf Hitler, rather than having a socialist Germany, right next to a socialist USSR, which would have changed history drastically. Obviously, it doesn't do anything good to look back and think, oh, I wish Germany would have gone socialist. I'm so sad Germany didn't go socialist, because that doesn't do us any good. It didn't. World War II happened. It is what it is now. We have to deal with the ramifications even still today. But we can still learn from it, right? We can learn who the extremist right wingers actually did ally with, and we can see that fascism is a capitalist and imperialist ideology, an ideology that suppresses the proletariat in revolt, and the working masses in revolt, with violence and suppression and hateful ideology and all this stuff. And to think that like the Liberal Democratic Party in the US isn't capable of something similar, I think is naive. Or to think that the Social Democrats, a lot of them, or the so-called leftists, wouldn't ally with the Democratic Party if they moved in a more violent and censorship-esque direction, which they already are. They already are. So yeah, in order to save capitalism in crisis, because both parties in the U.S. are ultimately an expression, or an political organ of the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, the capitalists, and they'll do whatever they can to maintain the ruling class as it exists. and the system as it exists. Because the ruling class is the ruling class because they're the exploiting class. Because they're the class that owns the means of production. All right. Let 1 sec. I'm reading a couple more interesting things I saw in the chat here, but I do want to hop into talking about these books that I've read this summer. But Jacob says, "Hey Eddie, I was able to salvage your old viral TikTok that you did in response to Jordan Belfort's dumb take on Venezuela. Would you like for me to either post it on TikTok or send it to you? You could do either or both. Definitely send it to me for sure. But you can post it on your own too if you want. But I would like it because I don't know if I think it's on YouTube, but I would love to get a hold of it if it's not. So yeah, that would be awesome. So, oh, that's where Hunter Avalon rage quit. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing it. Here, actually, maybe we can even react to it. I definitely want to watch, especially if I do end up debating him eventually here. Then it'll be helpful for me to watch you debate him, obviously. Okay. And boom. All right. Sick nasty. Should communists join anti-life liberal protests? It depends. I mean, personally, I'm pro choice or pro choice. So like obvious like I've made the choice to speak up a little bit about it, but always obviously tie it to the class issue, tie it to the economic question. Like, we're forcing women to carry babies to term now, and we don't have, or we're the only country that doesn't have paid maternal leave by law. So we're really handicapping working women then, which is always the result of these sort of policies, is they hurt working women much more than wealthy women, like everything in capitalism. So obviously pointing that out is what I've been doing. I haven't gone to any protests or rallies or anything, but if you think you can reach people and point out the class issue and how women's struggle needs to be tied with class struggle, and give them Kristen Godsey's book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, and other arguments for economic independence. If you think you can do that at the protests, I say go for it. But, it's the same with anything. Anytime there's social movements or social uprisings or social protests and, the working class is involved and the working class is there, it's always, a good idea to go and, as they say, raise the property question. So be like, why are these autocratic policies happening? Why are they repealing Roe v. Wade when a majority of people in most states or most areas don't want that? It's because, the capitalists own the government. The government isn't actually a government for the masses. The state is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. We need class struggle to overthrow the bourgeoisie if we're going to have, a real struggle for minorities issues and for women's rights and these other social issues. If you think it's worth it to go and convince people of that, I say go for it. If you don't think there's any working class people there, if you think it's all petty bourgeois or capitalist people there, don't go. Or if you think your time could be spent elsewhere, don't go. Dust James is here. Hi, y'all. What up, Dust? Thanks for hanging out. You on the road today, or you got the day off? It's no mistake that the Roe v. Wade repeal and the gun control bill are happening at the same time. Piss two groups off and pit them against each other, keep us divided and distracted. And this is actually a good point that I've been meaning to bring up. So before I talk about these books, I do want to respond to that because the Democrats are in a crisis. They're really in trouble. It's looking like the Democrats are going to get smoked in the elections. We don't know if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or whoever the Democrats, the party puts as their nominee. Like, we don't know if they're going to win. they could potentially get smoked. So the Democrats need a way to get Joe Biden's numbers back up, or their polling numbers back up in general. Obviously, with gas prices being this high, as Joe Biden is sending, or the Biden administration, not Joe Biden himself. Joe Biden is basically just like a literal puppet of corporations. I think he might have died 2 years ago, and they're doing like a weekend at Bernie's thing where they kind of actually use him like a puppet. But the Biden administration is continually, focused on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is really a U.S. proxy war and a conflict between Russia and the U.S. empire. So Biden has continued to funnel money and weapons there as gas prices have gone up, and people have seen this, and people have been hurt by the increase in gas prices and the inflation. And his COVID policies weren't overly popular with a large number of the country, so it's looking like he's going to lose. But now this is going to get the Democrats, or a lot of Democrats are going to be mobilized. A lot of liberals are going to be mobilized in the streets, reaching out to people. There's already, I saw it on TikTok this morning, there's already people saying, this is why you need to vote. As even though this is happening under a Democratic administration, and like as one of my buddies who's a communist in the South pointed out, like they have an election this year where it's a pro-life Democrat versus a pro-life Republican. Like there are places where you literally don't even have the illusion of choice in voting. So yeah, this is gonna this decision is gonna allow the Democrats to mobilize their voters. So just remember that when you hear Democrats like crying about this and beating the drum about this, not necessarily working class Democrats. I'm talking about the politicians. We're also the only country that doesn't have paid maternal leave by law, and you never see them freaking out about that. We're one of the only developed countries without universal health care. We have all these disadvantages and disadvantages for women that our politicians never seem to care about. But when they can mobilize voters, when people are in the streets, the Democratic politicians are going to come out and take advantage of it like vultures and be like, oh, I would fight to keep Roe v. Wade intact. That's why you have to vote for me and donate to me. We need to donate to the Democratic Party like never before to defeat this assault on Roe v. Wade. So, yeah. Just be aware that the Democrats are going to use it like that. And the Republicans will do the same thing, with gun rights. Being a communist in the South has got to be tough. No kidding. No kidding. Hey, recently found your channel. Glad I did. I'm very good. Thank you. Just saw a wall post by Ewoks Unhinged shouting you out. So I logged into my YouTube feed and bam, your stream. Awesome. Thank you. Shout out to Ewoks Unhinged. He's awesome. Did you enjoy Gaddafi's Green Book? Great question. Now we can finally jump into these books. So I've read a handful of books so far this summer. Last summer, I did like an intense read of Capital, like a super close read, volume 1. So and that was my second time reading that. And I also read some history books. But this summer, I kind of wanted to read volume 2, but I also want to read Hegel and throw myself into George Hegel before I do volume 2 and 3, because understanding Hegel's dialectic will, I know it's going to help me understand the movements and the analysis that Marx is making in volume 2. So I've read the first 3 chapters of volume 2 already. Actually, I read them twice now because I wanted to really get an understanding of them and know whether I should continue reading volume 2 or go read Hegel first. And I think I should read Hegel first. So instead of reading, long story short, instead of doing an intensive reading of volume 2, like I did with volume 1 last summer, I've just been pounding a bunch of little books that I've wanted to read forever. And it's become very apparent to me why people say to read these, and why people say to read these before you read Capital Volume 1, even though I dove into the deep end and read Capital Volume 1. So I was like, I got to find out the heart of Marx. So I'm going to read Marx's masterpiece, which I'm glad I did that. You should definitely read these pamphlets and Marxist-Leninist or Maoist books, or, I have Gaddafi's Green Book. It's definitely good to read them after you've read Capital or during reading Capital too. But I feel like if I would have read them beforehand, it would have made Capital easier for me. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's always hard to say. But either way, these are great to read, and they're short, but they're just packed with good information. So which one do y'all want to start with? Do you want to start with Mao's quotes, Marxism and the National Question, To Kill a Nation, The Foundations of Leninism, or Gaddafi's Green Book? Lucas Miller says, "Hi Eddie, glad I found the channel." I'm glad you found us too. Hegel's system makes capital so much easier to navigate and understand. Exactly, Young Sandwich. Exactly, you get it, comrade. Thank you. German idealism breathes a whole new life into Marx's capital. Yes, so I've been told. America is the one kid from middle school with the garbage hand-me-downs but brags about his gold tooth. That was me. Foundations. All right. We got a lot of different answers here, but we'll start with foundations because that's the one I've read the most recently. So, Foundations of Leninism is by Joseph Stalin, and he's basically, he's explaining political strategy. He's explaining the tactics and the strategies of the Bolsheviks while reflecting on the revolution. And he splits the Russian Revolution into various stages. So he says we had this pre-revolutionary peaceful stage, and then there was a popular revolution, a popular uprising of the Russian masses. And then there was a proletarian / peasant revolution, which kind of overthrew the bourgeois government that had been put in power by the popular revolution. So he also then goes into a discussion of how a proletarian or socialist revolution could come to power and take power in a country on the back of a popular revolution. Basically meaning that they level skipped the bourgeois revolution or the capitalist revolution. So there were a lot of people dogmatically saying back then, no, we have to follow, reality has to follow exactly the path that Marx said it would, where you have feudalism, where eventually the peasants and the bourgeoisie overthrow the royalty or the ruling class of landlords, feudal lords. And then the bourgeoisie takes power, which allows the proletariat to expand and develop. The peasantry becomes the proletariat. Once the proletariat is fully developed, they overthrow the bourgeoisie, and then they can move to socialism. So there were people in Russia, which was a semi-feudal country, which still had a monarchy and many peasants and large landlords with a smaller proletariat than developed capitalist countries. They were saying we just need to wait it out. We need to wait it out until there's a bourgeois revolution, a capitalist revolution, then our proletariat can develop and they can overthrow the bourgeoisie. And Lenin and Stalin and the Bolsheviks said, no, we can have a proletarian and peasant revolution, a revolution of the underclasses on the backs of this popular revolution. We can skip over the bourgeois revolution. We don't have to just sit back and wait for capitalism and the proletariat to develop. And we can do this by having a proletarian alliance. So basically the masses had an uprising, which the proletariat and the peasants and the Bolsheviks were part of. And then there was another revolution within that when the bourgeois government in power was trying to continue World War I, which the people wanted to get out of. And they weren't giving the people peace, land, and bread, which is what the Bolsheviks were promising. So then the proletariat and the peasantry overthrew that government. And that's how we got the establishment of the Soviet Union. So Stalin talks about that in here a lot. It's really interesting. Obviously, Lenin goes over this a lot too. But it's really cool to see an analysis of it in retrospect. So obviously, Stalin's looking back. He has the power of hindsight, whereas a lot of what Lenin was writing was in the midst of the revolution, strategizing what to do next. And assessing the failures of past actions, versus Stalin is now taking the long view, because the revolution is now still in or socialism's in its process of construction, and the dictatorship of the proletariat had already been established. So that's really good. And then the other thing that Stalin does in this book is he lays out what Leninism is, basically the foundations of Leninism. So obviously we call ourselves Marxist Leninists. And there's various different sort of branches of Marxism or different ideologies that people label themselves. But the ideology of the Soviet Union was Marxism Leninism. So Stalin is laying out what people have said is Leninism, and Stalin usually says no, that's actually just Marxism. Lenin was just repeating what Marx and Engels said. But here is specifically what Leninism is. Here's what makes Leninism distinct. And it's mostly the theory of dictatorship of the proletariat and having a vanguard party which rallies the masses around it. But Stalin also says that Marx and Engels also said dictatorship of the proletariat, and um, so then he talks about the worker peasant alliance, which is usually associated with Leninism. But even with that, Stalin says, he pulls out this Engels quote that I had never read before, where Engels says, basically lays out the idea of the worker peasant alliance. Says that in countries where there's still a large peasantry, they can, and landowning class, the peasantry could ally with the proletariat against the capitalist class, the bourgeois class, and the landowning class, and overthrow them. So a lot of what's considered Leninism has just been taken, is just Lenin or stuff Lenin took from Marx and Engels, stuff that was lesser read, but that Lenin read because he had such a comprehensive and systematic understanding of Marx and Engels' work. And then the last thing Stalin lays out is a foundation of Leninism, or I don't know if it's the last thing. I might be missing things. I'm just giving a rough overview, and I'll check what people are saying in the chat once I finish my overview to see if anyone else has added anything interesting. But the other foundation of Leninism, or the other place Lenin is distinct from Marx, is his theory of imperialism, which we've talked about this before. Marx was starting to analyze colonialism and imperialism and capitalism's incessant need to accumulate and expand towards the end of his life. So he was moving in this direction towards analyzing imperialism as a stage of capitalism. But he would never see imperialism developed to the stage that it was in 1917 when Lenin's looking at it, where, literally the imperialist countries are drawn into a world war because they're fighting each other for wealth and fighting each other for the colonies, for territory, largely in the global south and the east. So that's the context Lenin is writing in, though. So he's able to give a systematic understanding of imperialism. And then in the stage that Stalin's writing in, Stalin points out that imperialism is the primary contradiction of capitalism, or at that time, meaning imperialism's the biggest or primary contradiction in the world. So therefore, any country who's fighting against imperialism, any country who's being attacked by imperialism, who imperialism is trying to take their sovereignty away, Marxists need to support that country in their struggle against imperialism, even if that's not a Marxist country, even if they're not, a socialist, proletarian, revolutionary country. If the U.S. or another imperialist country are trying to destabilize them and take their sovereignty away, their ability to determine themselves, their self-determination, then Marxists should support that. Yeah. So I'll scroll up a little bit here and see what people are saying. I think it's pronounced Hegel. Okay, thank you. Greetings from Venezuela, comrade. Greetings. Thank you for watching from Venezuela. That's awesome. Shout out to the Bolivarian Revolution and the Chavistas. There's an entire study series called Foundations of Leninism on my channel. Oh, awesome, Dust. Please, people, if you're reading Foundations of Leninism, especially if you're struggling with it, check that series out. Or if you don't even have Foundations of Leninism, you can't get your hands on it right now, go watch the study guide, because it's a great book. It's short, and yeah, I don't know, we've done a lot of study guides on our channel for the purpose of helping people through complicated books, or help people through Marxist texts when they're just starting out and don't know what all the words mean, so they can be very useful. So thanks for that, Dust. You're doing great work as always. Russia did have a bourgeois revolution, though. No. Yeah, the February Revolution, which preceded the October Revolution. Yes. If you're watching, make sure to drop a like. Thank you. I'm very, very bad at promoting myself. or telling people to like. But yes, please like, comment, subscribe, follow. Subscribe if you're on Twitch and you want to support the show, or find us on patreon.com/Midwestern Marx. Yeah, thank you. See here, kind of. Leninism is Marxism applied to the era of imperialism. That's a good way to put it. I like that. Yeah, it's a good. That's I would agree to that, because even the Worker Peasant Alliance, which is associated with Leninism, like Marx and Engels predicted it, yeah, but they didn't. I don't think they necessarily knew what the economic effects of imperialism would be on the countries targeted by imperialism or exploited by imperialism, which, as Lenin points out in his book Imperialism, is it holds the productive forces statically. It prevents the productive forces from developing themselves. So it prevents these countries from industrializing their agriculture, getting rid of the peasantry and whatnot, because you just have this like feudal landlord class that's no longer overthrown, that's like backed up by the United States, who's just exports, have transnational corporations export whatever capital they need to extract resources and utilize cheap labor in those countries. And all the wealth, all the surplus of the resources and labor in those countries is going into the profits and expansion of transnational corporations who aren't even based in those countries. So they're not developing their means of production, the things they use to produce and extract materials from the ground in those countries. They're developing things at home and only exporting what they need to suck the wealth out of the target nations. So, long story short, it leaves a lot of countries in a semi-feudal situation. Like Cuba, when they had their revolution, were almost in a completely feudal or slave-like situation outside of the cities. And in Cuba as well, similar to Russia, there were communists within the city saying, no, we can't have a revolution. Che Guevara is just an adventurist. Don't listen to him. He wants to organize the peasants, but we need to wait for the proletariat to fully develop and for capitalism to fully develop. And Che was saying, no, you ding dongs, imperialism is preventing the productive forces in Cuba from developing. So the proletariat's not going to develop normally as it would under, unaltered conditions of capitalism. It's being externally held in poverty by this American ruling class, who is allied with the feudal class, the landowning class, and the gangster dictator leader Batista. So we're not going to just have this natural development to capitalism, into capitalism, and the Cuban communists like, oh no, listen to Marx. We're dogmatism is Marxism. We're so smart. And then Che Guevara and Fidel went to the peasants, gave them a bunch of guns, and said, hey, want to overthrow the gangster US-backed dictator and all the landowners who basically own you like slaves. And all the Cuban peasants said yes, and they overthrew the leader, and now they don't have slavery anymore, and they have universal health care. And they built a bunch of hospitals in rural areas that never had health care previously. And gave everyone education and taught everyone to read. And Cuba's freaking awesome. Viva Chavez, you bet. Same thing with Peru. Absolutely. Yeah, Pedro Castillo was from a rural area. And, rural areas in the U.S. can be super poor, especially if you go in the South, like in Appalachia. Appalachia, it's kind of crazy how much poverty is down there compared to the North or the coasts. But it's not the same as like in Latin America when we talk about rural areas in countries like Peru or Cuba, who have been attacked by imperialism. Because a lot of these countries have had peasantries, they're have had like these feudal landlord classes who have usually oppressed the indigenous populations in these countries. And so there's a lot of contradictions and effects that stem from that. So it's different than like farmers in the U.S. Midwest. Yeah. Places like America, it's literally making them refoundations. My sister's friends and I radicalized my sister after her job started treating the employees like trash. Underpayment, welfare, and working conditions caused her to be a firm supporter of Marxism. There you go. I mean, most people who take the time to understand Marxism and read it, most working people, exploited people, alienated people, it makes a lot of sense to them pretty quickly, you know. Yeah. Okay, I gotta stop getting distracted and spacing out reading chat questions. Y'all are talking about some interesting stuff, but hey, Eddie, off topic, but are there? I want to answer this too. Off topic, but are there any plans for the Midwestern Marx Journal? Yes, we're working on volume 2. Obviously, our last print project was the classical text of Marxism by Thomas Riggins. So that took up. We're limited, obviously, in the time and energy of our graphic designers. So if anyone knows any graphic designers who would like to work for Midwestern Marx, or you are, please shoot us an email at midwesternmarx@gmail.com. Or if you are a graphic designer. But so that took their energy. But yeah, we've been working on volume 2 of the print journal. I've been brainstorming and working on the outline of my article. I'm super duper pumped about that, but we'll obviously talk about it more as it comes. We're really excited about the print aspect of our project, of our website. We feel like we have, like, after our first 2 print projects, the Journal of American Socialist Studies volume 1, and then the classical text of Marxism with Thomas Riggins, our recent one. We feel like we have our footing, you know, and we can pump out these printed works faster for people. So yeah, hopefully that one will come soon. I'm not going to put a timestamp on it or a date on it, because whenever we set a deadline, we end up going way beyond it. And then we end up rushing and stressing, when I'd rather just, you know, put all our effort into the journal, make it as good as possible, and release it when we know that it's complete, and good for people. Yeah, thank you. Good question. What are your thoughts on the political compass? Really stupid. We can take the political compass test at some point as a joke. Maybe we can do that today. I'll put it on the stream plan as a potential thing to do. Political compass is stupid, though. The German ideology is my political compass. We're not doing foundations of Leninism anymore. I want to read one more question. I think here is Lenin's major improvement on Marx's writing, that a revolution does not necessarily happen in the most developed capitalist country, but can happen in semi-feudal societies like Russia. For sure, for sure. And that kind of goes along with what we were talking about, like, with imperialism, keeping countries semi-feudal, making countries remain in this sort of state of semi-feudalism without a developed proletariat. So therefore, in order to overthrow imperialism, the primary contradiction of the current stage of capitalism in the world, you need to organize that peasant class against the feudal lord class. One more chat. Sorry. What's the difference between a factory worker and a retail clerk or cashier? One produces commodities with the boss's machines, and the other sells what the boss bought. Are retailers even more alienated? Good question. I think they're all alienated, and especially, like, you could almost make an analysis at this point in the imperialist countries, because they've outsourced so many jobs. Manufacturing has really left the US. We've been largely deindustrialized, and we have this oligarchic class, this ruling class of, like, finance capitalists, bankers, who also, you know, have their hands in industry and transnational corporations and elsewhere. But bankers and, like, real estate capitalists, people who own the land. So it's almost sort of a neo-feudalism, where a lot of people now work in the service industry because we don't actually produce a whole lot. So I think like, everywhere you should organize service workers, but in the US especially, I think a Marxist analysis realizes how many service workers we have and how little industry we have, how few traditional proletarians we have, and, you know, still organize those people and still rally the masses around the proletariat, as Marxist revolutions have done in the past. But I think in the US we'll see, like, a popular revolution, and it'll need to include, like, service workers, rural workers, the traditional industrial proletariat, all of them. And then, you know, we just got to be ready to lead the proletariat or the masses to power, which is why I think this is such an important book. Because I feel like a lot of times we think, like, you know, socialism is when a majority of the population becomes socialist. They realize it's a more moral system, and then we can implement socialism. It's like, No, in the past, socialist governments a lot of times have come to power on the backs of like mass popular revolutions, and they've been, look, we have a theory, we have a system of government that we want to implement, based on dialectical materialism, where the masses are in power, and where we move away from exploitation and lead to a classless society, and we engage in economic construction rather than destruction and imperialism, and all the horrible things about capitalism. And the masses go, okay, that sounds good to me. Those people, have been doing mutual aid in my community, and they've been helping me out a whole lot more than my boss and the American government. So I'm going to follow them in this popular revolution. And, I guess I'm a socialist now. So, yeah, really interesting to read. It's a really good idea to go in depth, and understand how revolutions actually happen, because that's when you start to realize, like, oh, maybe the US isn't that far off from a revolution. Like, and that's not me being optimistic, like, oh, the workers are going to rise up and take power tomorrow. Like, no, conditions in the imperial core, as imperialism starts to end, and be defeated by the anti-imperialist countries, conditions may get really, really bad here, and it may drive people to a popular revolution, which could be really, really terrible and have really, really terrible effects on the masses and on pretty much everyone in society. So that's why it's so important to organize people, and have an organized group of working class people who are, theoretically and politically educated, so you can rally the masses around those people in a time of crisis and lead to a system of construction rather than destruction. Um, yeah. Oh, I'm almost out of water, y'all. Not ideal. I'm gonna have to go get some more. All right. What's next? I think the most people wanted Gaddafi's Green Book next. So let's see if I can remember Gaddafi's Green Book. I talked about this on TikTok, I know. So Muammar Gaddafi came to power in Libya. I can't remember when. Let's look it up. Mm. Muammar Gaddafi became de facto leader of Libya in 1969 after leading a group of young Libyan army officials against King Idris in a bloodless coup d'etat. So it was 1969. It's described as a coup, but it was really a popular revolution. It was people overthrowing the sort of imperialist backed feudal monarchy. As you heard there, they had a king. And I don't know that much about Libya's conditions or their history. And actually, reading this book made me want to learn a lot more about Libya's conditions and their history. People who know me know that Africa and colonialism in Africa, I wouldn't say it's a blind spot, because I still know a decent amount about it, especially like Lumumba and Thomas Sankara more so. But compared to like Latin America or what I know about Asia, or imperialism in those places, my knowledge on Africa is kind of lacking. So this made me want to learn more. But the Green Book is super interesting. It is Gaddafi's political philosophy, that he rallied people in Libya around, and it's socialism applied to Libya, and it is inspired by Marxism Leninism, but you can tell that Gaddafi's not a Marxist Leninist. There are places where he diverges from Marxism Leninism, and ultimately there's a sort of collaborationism. He's preaching to collaborate in a lot of ways with the property owning classes. And Libya, of course, is sort of a semi-feudal country. You have peasant producers, so again, not the same conditions as the United States. But he talks a lot about working together with even like business owners. Or he says that every business though should be a cooperative, so it should be owned by the workers too. But he's in favor of keeping markets, and yeah. So the criticism of him from like a staunch, strict Marxist-Leninist perspective is like, you can't collaborate with the classes or the opportunist classes, the classes, economic classes in society who always side with imperialism. When you're a country who's trying to have a socialist revolution, or create a socialist economic system, or any kind of economic system different from capitalism, who's being targeted by the empire. You can't collaborate with the opportunists within your own country, or they'll collaborate with the empire to overthrow you. And that's kind of what happened. Obviously, the U.S. literally had to ship rebel groups, extremist groups, into Libya to destroy Gaddafi. And they launched a massive propaganda campaign in Libya to try and turn people against Gaddafi. And I've spoken to people who participated in the Arab Spring, or the so-called Libyan revolution that overthrew Gaddafi, which was really just a U.S. Regime change effort, backing some of the worst extremists in the region. I've spoken to people who participated in that revolution. Like, yeah, we were tricked by the United States into thinking we're fighting for freedom, and now Libya is a disaster. It's a war-torn country who basically didn't have a central government. So before that, Gaddafi had turned Libya into one of the most prosperous countries in Africa. Really, what got the U.S. to target him, a lot of people think, was he kept proposing building an African central bank. So obviously, one of the major issues in Africa is that these countries are in debt, or owe money to the IMF and the World Bank. So the IMF and World Bank would come in and say to either U.S. puppet leaders or whoever was the leader in these countries at the time, mostly after they gained their independence after World War II, when the IMF and the World Bank were created, they would say, we'll give you a bunch of loans, we'll give you a bunch of money from these financial institutions, but you have to change your policies and implement austerity. So basically, cut labor regulations, allow the U.S. to exploit cheap labor, cut environmental regulations, get rid of social programs, so none of the surplus of that country is being reinvested in the people. The maximum amount of the surplus can be extracted by transnational corporations in the West. So then the IMF and World Bank jacked up the interest on these loans to an incredible level, so countries can never basically get out of the debt that they owe to the IMF and World Bank. And it's an imperialist strategy we call debt trapping. And the IMF and World Bank's structural adjustment loans have become infamous. Because the structural adjustment is the adjustment to the economy, to the politics. In order to get this loan, you have to adjust your economy so that the U.S. can exploit you to the maximum extent, or Western transnational corporations in general. So Gaddafi wanted to create an African central bank so he could basically give developmental loans to other countries in Africa, loans outside of the IMF and World Bank. And this is a lot of what China's tried to do with their Belt and Road policy in giving low interest developmental loans to countries. But it would be awesome if Africa had a socialist central bank that was so they could finance their own development. And that's what Gaddafi wanted to do. And a lot of people think that's why the U.S. wanted to take him out. But, Gaddafi was constructing a sort of Libyan socialism for years, like we said, with co-ops and sort of independent producers who own single plots of land. And then, factories that were nationalized. And a lot of the surplus of this country was reinvested in developing Libya, developing their infrastructure, developing their banking system, developing all these different things that make life better for people. And this is what's been destroyed and dismantled, after the U.S. intervention. And Libya, as we said, now basically had no central government for years. I don't know the current state of that, but it was completely war torn. They had an open air slave market. Sorry, I'm looking up a video. They had an open air slave market for a while. Just a total war torn, impoverished disaster. And sort of ruined everything that had been constructed under Gaddafi. And Gaddafi lays out his path of construction, and here he lays out he spends so much time talking about the government and how to handle the question of authority. So he was super concerned with not being authoritarian, right? Not being just a dictator ruling over his people, but placing power in the hands of the people and dividing up the government so all different sects of people had an equal voice in the government and had an equal voice in the governance of their country. Different than Marxism-Leninism, which just says dictatorship of the proletariat, right? The underclasses take power, and then the government, the job of the government or the administrative apparatus is to remain tied to the proletariat, to remain an arm of the proletariat, to not become a disconnected bureaucracy. Gaddafi was worried about that, but he spent a lot more time writing about authority and how to handle authority and not be authoritarian. Spent a lot more time writing about that than Lenin or Engels or any classical Marxist really did. So that's kind of where it diverges from Marxism-Leninism, but it's so ridiculous, like the U.S. accusations that, Gaddafi was giving his soldiers Viagra so they could assault citizens, or Gaddafi was torturing all the slaves who lived with him, and nobody else owned slaves but him, and all these, absurd accusations of him being a dictator, him ruling over his country with an iron fist. And then you read what he has to say, and it's like, he's very concerned with not being a dictator, and he was a strong man, right? And to take power in a country on some level, you need to be a strong man. He's not weak, but he's not this evil, ruthless dictator who kills puppies on the weekend for fun. He's clearly very intelligent, and he implemented a systematic program which brought many people in his country out of poverty and created a very prosperous country and a very prosperous system that the U.S. destroyed. And this is what Hillary Clinton had to say about it, who played a role in the U.S. overthrow of Gaddafi and the U.S. or the NATO-led intervention in Libya.
So, that is the land.
1 sec, I'm going to turn it up.
Unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, oh, I'm sure it did.
So she visited Libya and he got overthrown. She goes, we came, we saw, he died. And then she asked, the interviewer, did that have anything to do with your visit? And Hillary's like, oh, I'm sure those crazy Republicans will say I had something to do with it. As I celebrate and laugh about his death and his overthrow and literally say, we came, we saw, and he died. Like, we came to Libya and he died. But I don't have anything to do with it. Ha, 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 ha. Now this country is going to have an open-air slave market instead of continuing to bring their people out of poverty. And the CBS News person's like, oh, ho, ho, Hillary, you're such a feminist icon. Definitely not a murderous war criminal who just destroyed one of the most prosperous countries in the continent of Africa. Oh, ho, 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 ho. These people are gross. Hey, Eddie, I want to know your thought on the Naxalite movement in India right now. I don't know much about it. I do not know much about India, sorry. The governments of India and China working together will have great impact. That said, the so-called ML parties of India believe China is oppressing Muslims, so they still pretty fash. That's interesting. That's such a tough... Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, India is such a far-right country. Like, Narendra Modi is close to like a fascist leader as you can find in the world today, really. In the Hindutva party, just basically just Hindu nationalism. And, it's ironic because India brutally oppresses Muslims in their own country. In Kashmir, I believe, is where the worst of it happens. As I said, not an expert on India. But, India is a horribly right-wing country, and they have more people in poverty today than the number of people China has brought out of poverty with their poverty elimination program. So the economy of China has been more successful, even though, the ideology in India, or the ideological struggle, has been won by the right-wingers and the forces of imperialist collaboration for years. Now you've had all these uprisings and, working class strikes and uprisings and stuff, but it would be nice to see them forge closer ties with China and better relations with China. Because, obviously China's main concern is going to be the fact that Modi is an ally to the West, an ally to the U.S., and that India for years has allowed, the U.S. to use them as sort of a hub of imperialism, and an ally of capitalist imperialism. And obviously they share a border with China, so that's concerning to China, but China's going to try and develop them economically because that's what they try and do with every country. So yeah, it'd be nice to see some progress in the ideological struggle in India, I guess, or that would be really encouraging. But there's a lot of economic struggle and a lot of working class struggle in India, and like you said, their government is more like so many governments, realizing that trading with China is just going to be too good to pass up. It's going to make too much money and make too much sense for countries to just say, nope, I'm not going to trade with China because my daddy, the United States, told me not to. More and more countries are going to say, nah, I think we'll trade with China. The entire modern state of India is a direct result of historical and neo-imperialism. There's a book I want to read. I don't know if it's a good one to read, and I should know more about India because I love Vijay Prashad so much. But I actually haven't read much of his work about India itself, his home country. But I have the book Caste, which I got for Christmas like a few years ago, and it's been on my list. I've just been passing it up for other books for a while. But if that's a good book, maybe I should read it. I think it's like a Western book. It was literally like on Oprah's book club. So it's kind of liberal. Some of my family members, they're well-meaning and they just hear that they think, I'm left-wing. So they buy me like liberal stuff for Christmas. But this book did look interesting. The origins of our discontents. So I don't know. If it's on Oprah's book club, it can't be that socialist because Oprah's like the richest woman in the world. But yeah, that's Gaddafi's Green Book and a little bit about the history of Libya. Definitely recommend it. It's really, really good. It is really, 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 really good to read anti-liberal theory that's not explicitly Marxist or Marxist-Leninist. So this is anti-liberal, anti-imperialist, and the economic system is explicitly socialist, but it's not Marxist or Marxist-Leninist. So it allows you to see an alternative to liberalism, and then it allows you to place Marxism-Leninism in relation to something else besides liberalism, right? So I could say this is Gaddafi's what he calls the third. What is it? Can't remember what he calls his theory. The third universal theory. I think that's what he called it, like the third universal theory. So you can place that, in comparison to Marxism-Leninism, which of course you can place in comparison to liberalism. And you can also compare the Green Book or Gaddafi's theory to liberalism. And, some things maybe that you had internalized or that you just presupposed because you have grown up in a liberal democratic society, because the most of us have grown up in capitalist liberal democratic society, there's a lot of things that we just sort of accept without thinking about them. And when you read an anti-liberal book that's not necessarily Marxism-Leninism, it helps you realize that and help you realize there are other ideas outside of liberalism. In our entire imperialist system, our entire structure is based on liberalism, yeah, and the principles of bourgeois democracy, which isn't democracy at all. So, yeah, great to read that. Let's do Mao's quotations next. I've been trying to get my buddy to read Mao's quotations. I can't get him to do it. But it's good. It's so good. Cast may not be horrible, but of course it will have a liberal bent for sure. For sure. But yeah, Mao's quotations is awesome. I've read On Contradiction, and I've read On Physical Education, actually, because I think it's super interesting. One of Mao's lesser read texts. What else have I read from Mao? I don't know. I've done obviously tons of research into China and the construction of modern China. It's one of my favorite videos that I've done on the YouTube, which talks in detail about the economic policies that were carried out under Mao. But in Mao's quotations, he's talking about strategy, talking about economic policy, talking about times during the revolutionary struggle, the pre-revolutionary struggle. the process of construction and how to defeat imperialism. And obviously, this was part of the Cultural Revolution, was people were supposed to read the Little Red Book, and communists were carrying it around and reading it and studying it all the time. And today, China regrets the Cultural Revolution. They say that was the major mistake of Mao. But regardless, you can kind of see what people were being taught, or as we hear in the U.S., indoctrinated with in China at this time, which is fair to say they were, being indoctrinated with it. But for years prior, they had been indoctrinated with colonial ideology, imperialist ideology. They had been subjugated to horrible exploitation. The British had gotten the Chinese people purposely had gotten the Chinese people addicted to opium. So that they'd be easier to exploit. You had a horrible, exploitative, and oppressive and violent landlord class who ruled over the semi-peasant, semi-feudal population of China. So, in certain ways, like, there were certain cultural practices that needed to be changed, like the policy of foot binding. It was very common for young girls to bind up their feet very tight every day so they would be curved at an unnatural angle because it was considered beautiful or whatever. There were certain cultural practices that Mao and the communists wanted to do away with. And then they wanted to move people towards a more collective, more socialist society, economically as well as culturally. So Mao's laying out a lot of that in here, but really he's just laying out, what is good revolutionary practice. And as Lenin did in the Foundations of Leninism, Mao sort of breaks the revolution in China into various periods. It's like here we have the pre-revolutionary period where, and also it's different though than Stalin, because Russia under before the October Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution was an imperialist country. They were one of the empires who was fighting in World War I for colonial expansion, versus China was a country victimized by colonialism and imperialism. So they were fighting at first against the Japanese colonizers. So that's the first period that Mao talks about. And then they had to fight the Civil War against the Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalists who they were allied with in the struggle against the colonizers, but who were pro-capitalist and very reactionary and right-wing, and eventually accepted funding and arming from the U.S., which brought them into a civil war with Mao and the communists. The communists won. So that's obviously another period, the period of communist revolution after the anti-colonial sort of popular revolution. And then you have the period of construction of constructing and developing infrastructure, developing industry, industrializing agriculture so people wouldn't starve and you wouldn't have a peasant class anymore, doing land redistribution, so taking the feudal landlords and giving their land back to the peasants. A lot of the landlords were killed by the peasants during the revolutionary period after the years of exploitation that the landlords had inflicted on the peasants. And yeah, Mao's just laying out what the strategy of the Communist Party of China was during all these periods, and why they were able to be successful, or the mistakes they made. And he's also laying out, sort of a guide. This is what individual communists should do, and this is how Marxist-Leninists should analyze the world. And, there's stuff to criticize in there for sure, as far as it being slightly dogmatic. But one of the main things I noticed while reading this book is that Mao would be against all of the modern Marxist-Leninist, Maoist third worldists. The people who are like, we can't have a revolution in the U.S. We just have to wait for all the colonized countries to have revolutions, and then, just wait for the U.S. to topple. Or yeah, people who think dogmatically like that. Mao was not a dogmatic thinker, and there are places where the things he says are in direct opposition to what most the Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, third worldists believe. The sort of Jason Unruhs of the world, if anyone knows him. So Mao is not dogmatic. He's absolutely materialist. Not overly dogmatic. There are small parts where where I think I would criticize Mao looking back in retrospect as being like slightly ultra left, which is why I think Maoism has been taken probably by the CIA and CIA backed, controlled opposition groups. have taken Maoism and made it into this sort of ultra-left, pro-imperialist deviation that is Maoist third worldism. But yeah, Mao would be against all of that, all that dogmatism. He's mostly a very good materialist, and he also lays out like military strategy in here. Was the last thing I wanted to say. He lays out, here's how communists should fight. Here's how communists should carry out battles. Here's what the soldiers should do. Here's how soldiers should train. And I have so many buddies who joined the military in order to pay for college, or who joined it to wrestle for a military team. And it's just so interesting. They, pretty much everyone who's in the military, if you know people in the military, they complain. A lot of them hate it. A lot of it's very irrational and stupid, the way that the military does things. A lot of people become institutionalized in the military and then get no help, transitioning back into the real world once they get out. It's, there's a lot of terrible things about the imperialist U.S. military. Who knew? But that's why it's interesting to read Mao's quotations and read what he's saying about the military. The military needs to help people. When the military doesn't have fighting to do, they should be involved in economic construction, helping the people build things. The military should be studying theory, and they should be educating themselves, and they should, constantly be working to have good relations with the masses and to serve the masses. And there should be good relations between the officers and the soldiers. And any places where there aren't good relations, here's what we should do to fix that, which, again, if you know anybody in the military, there are rarely good relations between the officers and the soldiers. So it's just interesting seeing how a socialist military or a socialist army is structured and organized compared to a capitalist imperialist army. A socialist one is so much better. I've been trying to get one of my military friends to read this, but no luck so far. Ryan Tracy, thank you for the $10 super chat. Really, really appreciate the support, comrade. Love seeing you on YouTube. Well, thank you. I love being on YouTube, and because of people like you, I can continue to do it more and more because you support the show and support me. So I really, really appreciate you giving some of your own personal finances over to our work at Midwestern Marx. You rock. Thank you, Ryan. Marxists when the U.S. doesn't crash. Yeah, Marxists have to stop predicting when crashes are going to happen. You can't predict when it's going to happen. The system's too anarchic and irrational. You can kind of predict when it's going to happen roughly, but you can't predict exactly how and when, unless you've just figured something new out. The DPRK does that. The Army is essentially a workforce, and recently Army medics have been helping people during COVID. Yes, that's a good point. Derek Ford talked about that. He's obviously from PSL, or Liberation School, and we had him on a podcast. And he said, there are good relations between the people and the police, or the people and the military. In the U.S., if you see a cop, you get scared that he's going to pull you over or do something violent. Versus in the DPRK, the cops, people feel like they're actually there to help you. And, there are soldiers walking around late at night, like with their guns, and people aren't scared. Kids are running around them because the soldiers they know are actually there to help the people and are engaged in actually working with the people and helping them in their process of economic construction. And the people actually believe in what the soldiers are fighting for, right? We know that all the wars that our young people, our young soldiers are sent to fight and die in are wars for imperialist capitalist expansion abroad. We know Iraq was based on lies and based on confessions gained through torturing people. And yet we sacrifice so many young lives, or have so many people in the U.S. today with PTSD from the Iraq War, fighting for oil oligarchs. Really, as sad as that is, and I'm sorry for people who were tricked into joining that war. If we have any in the audience, don't feel bad about what you did. Now we just got to work to overthrow the empire so more people aren't sucked into that. But the people in the DPRK in China actually believe in what their military is fighting against, which is imperialism, and particularly U.S. or NATO imperialism, Western imperialism. And what the heck else was I going to say? They believe what they're actually fighting against. I don't know. Yeah. DPRK soldiers can always be found engaged in civil community service and development, for sure. Hello from Turkey. Hello. That's cool. I don't know if I've ever had a viewer from Turkey before. Thank you for joining us, Neo. Appreciate all our comrades from Turkey. The military should have handled distribution in response to supply chain crisis, and really the minute the pandemic started. Yeah, and there's so much the military could be mobilized for. Like, a lot of my friends have been going to like drill or to whatever they have to do for duty. And I have friends like in the National Guard, so they're not getting deployed necessarily. Although National Guard people can still get deployed, and they do. But what they've been doing, they just have them like mopping floors and sitting around all day. Literally, like most of what they do is just sit in a warehouse and not really do anything when they're not training. When they're just doing their drill or whatever, their duty. It's like, I was talking to my friend. I'm like, wouldn't you rather be like helping an old lady or something, like helping people cross the street or like painting a fence or doing anything for the community? He's like, yeah, of course. Like, this is insane. I hate just sitting in a room all day. And it's like, why are we spending so much money on this as a society? Why are we just paying people to sit in a room all day in camouflage? Like, come on. So yeah, I'm gonna refill my water real quick. I'll pull up at the after party. Just kidding. I'll pull up a YouTube video for everyone. Not a YouTube video. I'll pull up myself wrestling again, like I always do. We'll pull up the video we were watching the other day of me versus the national champ. Me being his last loss in college. Go me. But I'll skip more towards the end because a lot of people in the chat have already seen this. All right, I'll be right back, comrades. Cheers. How am I doing? Did I win? All right, I'll leave that up so I can pull it up at the same spot next time for those who are invested now. Let me check my phone to see if Carlos is at me back. I think Carlos is busy, as usual, doing his philosophy. He's a busy guy. Busy Professor Carlos. Here's a video that supposedly debunks 5 myths about the USSR. Okay. I'm down to check it out. Put it on the list, huh? I'm almost done with these books, with the summary of these books. Got 2 more books left. Can't wait for the Caldwell's book you guys are publishing. He's one of my favorite Marxists. Oh, I'm glad. Glad to hear that. We were talking about the print project earlier. Just talking about like how excited we are about the printing aspect of our project and how we can't wait to do more print books for y'all and for us. So yeah, really excited about that. Oh, Miss No Personality with the $5 super sticker. Thank you so much for supporting our show. The fact that you support our show alone, gives you a better personality than most people. So I don't know why you're calling yourself Miss No Personality. You've got a big personality to me. Thank you for supporting our show financially. Really support you. I mean, sorry, really appreciate you, and you support us. Awesome. All right. Oh, another one. Tunia Tahitian Fire 987, $5. Hey brother, love your content. Any chance you'll do videos with Caleb Maupin? We've been planning to do an interview or to talk forever. He invited us to one of his conferences. I think it already happened. I don't know if that one worked out for us to go. But certain Midwestern Marx writers have gone to his conferences. I've written a book review on his book, Breadtube Serves Imperialism. So yeah, there's been collaboration. It's a little bit dicey. I want to be careful what I say, but like relations between him and cpusa, which is my party, aren't the best. So I got to be careful there and make sure I'm not stepping on any toes when I work with him. So that kind of gets in the way. But we've wanted to do a podcast or an interview forever. We just haven't. But definitely a chance that happens in the future. Thank you for the $5. Wait, we can order physical books from you? Yes. You absolutely can. I'm pulling it up for you so I can send you a link. Right here is how you buy. Wait, that's not right. Where is it? There it is. Okay, sorry. Here's where you buy our books. We don't have the Journal of American Socialist Studies back out yet. I actually need to text Carlos about that because we want to have that done already. But yeah, those are our most recent text. Yeah. What are your thoughts on Haas? Okay, we talk about this every time. I don't like that Pat sock. I mean, that's okay. Like I said, I'll ally with anyone on stuff we disagree with, pretty much. Not anyone, but any Marxist Leninist. And just because I disagree with someone or disagree with certain things they say, or even disagree with half of what they say, doesn't mean I'll disavow them and cancel them and refuse to ever work with them, or doesn't mean I don't think they're ultimately a positive force, or they ultimately serve the struggle against imperialism and for socialism. But Haas, Caleb Maupin, Jackson Hinkle, these are all people we've talked with or talked about on the stream extensively, and they're all people who we've worked with in various capacities, but we haven't given like our full and utmost support to them and said these are the best guys ever. Listen to everything they say, because we have criticisms of things that they say. That doesn't mean we shouldn't form alliances, because the Stalin and Lenin and the Bolsheviks allied with a bunch of interesting groups during the Popular Revolution in Russia, and it allowed them to create socialism and educate everyone and move people away from reactionary, hateful ideology and create a constitution that had anti-racist laws written into it. Next time you see Carlos, thank him for advertising Tribune. They gained a subscriber and the movement moves on. Thank you, Andrew Ray. Thank you so much for the $10. I will absolutely tell Carlos that. I'm glad you enjoyed the Tribune. I'm not even actually sure what that is. I'm not the Orinoco Tribune. Is that what you're talking about? Um, that's what you're talking about. I absolutely love that site, and I do use them a lot for information about Venezuela, Bolivia, and whatever else. But yeah, I'm glad you liked it, and I'll definitely let Carlos know, and we'll have to advertise that more. Do you still do anything on Patreon? I signed up at Looks Inactive, and there's no Discord. Yeah, I do stuff. I posted on Patreon today, and you should be able to join our Discord. I don't know why you weren't. That's not ideal. I will post the Discord link in Patreon right this instant. Before I review this next book or give a summary of this next book, because that is not ideal. That the Discord link is not there because we have a Discord, and there's a lot of cool people who hang out in our Discord. So I am going to. I always say I'll try and be more active in the Discord, but I can't ever make any promises. It's hard. And now I've been trying to interact with everyone via the stream. So I feel like there's less obligation for me to always be checking the Discord. Not that I ever really checked it all the time. But edit invite link, expire after. Do 7 days, sure. I want my Discord link to never expire. How about that? I've tried to set it to that before. It just doesn't seem to work. All right, let me make a post. Posting on the Midwestern Marx Patreon. Patreon.com/Midwestern Marx. For Midwestern Marx and Eddie Liger. All right, I published the Discord, the Discord link on Patreon, so now you should be able to click it and join. I'm sorry that you couldn't before. Apologies. And I'm not super active on Patreon. I just didn't. Okay, so actually, update with the Patreon. I just announced on Patreon. This is the post I made earlier today or yesterday. I can't remember. But I can't do the book club anymore. The book club was taking me like 6 to 8 hours or more a day to plan out. And then I was just exhausted. It was taking too much of my time, but I still want to give the Patreon supporters exclusive content, obviously, because I really, 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 really appreciate people supporting us financially, because I know that's hard, especially right now. So obviously, if people support our work on Patreon financially, that means they really, really appreciate our work, and I really appreciate them. So I want to give those people some kind of content or some kind of access. I just can't do the book clubs anymore. It's taking too much mental energy with all the other reading I have to do. It was possible before I started grad school. And ever since I've started grad school, like I can't do my grad school homework on the weekends and plan a book club. So long story short, I'll finally shut up about the book club and why we're not doing it, because I really enjoyed the book club. But I'm thinking bi-weekly hangouts, because it's not like I'm not reading. I just don't have the time to plan out and systematize a book club, but I'm still reading. So I could say in the Discord or the Patreon, here, I'm reading Marxism and the National Question by Stalin this week. And I don't know where I'm going to get. I'll probably finish the book or get halfway through. And then on Sunday, we'll talk, or we'll meet up and we'll talk about it. So I think that's what has been proposed by people in the Patreon, as far as I've seen, and in the Discord. So yeah, I'll get more. I'll do more with that after this stream or this week. I have a lot of time to work on the website this week. So, all right, we got a bunch of super chats coming in right now. Thank you all so much for the support. Adam Abbas Keller, or Abbas. Either way, Adam says, big fan of what you're doing. Been following quite some time via TikTok. Grew up in CR. Nice. I asked previous, but is the structure of the DPRK what we should be aiming for? I truly don't know much. That's a great question, Adam. Thank you so much for your support. Glad to meet a fellow Iowan. Although I'm originally from Wisco. Actually, I was born in Iowa. moved to Wisco, was raised in Wisco, then came back to Iowa. But the structure of the DPRK, I mean, some people say the DPRK is the most socialist country on the planet, and I definitely understand why people say that, or the closest to communism, because ideologically their people are so strong, right? They've been able to combat imperialist ideology so thoroughly that they've kept their sovereignty even despite having the U.S. occupy half the peninsula. But you know, the DPRK isn't even part of the IMF and World Bank. So they're not even part or involved in, really, other than through China, in the global financial system or the global markets, which there's a reason that China had to open up, you know, and do market reforms, and try and construct socialism while having specific zones where they allowed private, global, or transnational investment. And it's because that global financial system is so powerful, right? And it has so much control over the global economy. And even despite the DPRK not being attached to that, their people have remained strong, and they've continued to pursue economic construction. But they've been trying to get into the IMF and World Bank for years, right? So people who say that like the DPRK is the only true socialist country that's left because they're not part of the IMF and World Bank, like, that's dumb. The DPRK themselves want to join the IMF and the World Bank, and that wouldn't automatically make them not real socialism. So that's just, you know, like Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, third worldists, like what we were talking about before when we were talking about ultra leftists. That's them like projecting their fantasy onto the DPRK, their fantasy where socialism just makes everyone equally, owns exactly equal wealth, but we all have the communist brain, and we all think collectively, so we're okay with it, and we can establish this society overnight. It's ultra leftism, and some people project that fantasy on the DPRK. It's not what the DPRK is, but it is a socialist country. It is a country who has fought and defeated imperialism time and time again, for years now. And they're a country attempting to construct communism or construct socialism and defeat capitalist imperialism. That being said, you know, to say that this is a country that we should aim for, I mean, it depends on who you mean by we. Certain countries could do certain things that certain things that the DPRK has done. But you know, every country is unique, and every country is going to have a unique struggle. And if you're talking about like where I'm from, the U.S., right? You said you're from Cedar Rapids, so you're from the U.S. too. Where we're from, the U.S., like our constructing socialism here, in the Americas would look way different. Nothing like the DPRK constructing socialism in the DPRK. They had to construct socialism after having their infrastructure bombed to oblivion by the U.S., losing 20% of their population, having half their country occupied, and with the most stringent economic sanctions ever seen in human history, other than the ones on Cuba, placed upon them. You know, those are the conditions in which the DPRK has had to survive and had to construct socialism. That's obviously not the conditions in the U.S. Things are deteriorating for the masses, for the working classes. But you know, we haven't faced the brute force of imperialism and the, you know, economic destruction and economic stagnation that comes about because of imperialism. So constructing socialism here with our economy would look way different. You know, there would be much less construction that would have to be done. Like, you know, in a lot of socialist countries, they had to build housing. You know, that was the first thing like the Communist Party and the socialist economy said about doing was like building up housing as they built up agriculture and industry so they could feed and house people. In the U.S., you know, we already have more empty houses than we have homeless people. You know, we don't need to build more houses. We just need to get rid of the landlords, get rid of the people who own the houses so we can put homeless people in them, give homeless people shelter. So, you know, the path of construction will be different in every country, but it'll be very, very, very different, you know, here in North America and developed capitalist countries than it was in the DPRK, which was a colonized semi-feudal country. Great question. Oh, where'd you go, David Burney? There you are. $5 super sticker from David Burney, longtime Patreon supporter. Great comrade. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate your support. Always appreciate you and your support. DPRK means there's immense siege, which means there are things like forbidding marriage to foreigners. Yeah, people are like, you know, if you're an American, you can't walk around in the grocery store in the DPRK alone. You have to have a tour guide, or it's dangerous. It's like, yeah, the U.S. killed 20% of their population 70 years ago and has surrounded their country with their military to enforce these sanctions, to enforce this embargo so the DPRK can't trade with anyone. If one of those Americans are in their grocery store, that's scary for them. They're going to be like, what the heck? Let's get him out of here. And it's not because people in the DPRK are evil and brainwashed. It's because the U.S. is evil and violent and is run by bourgeois capitalist imperialists who killed 20% of the DPRK's population 70 years ago. I mean, that's one person in every family of 5. So imagine the amount of trauma and generational trauma that the U.S. sanctions and that the U.S. bombing campaign in the Korean War has left on the peninsula of Korea. Incredible amounts. So, yeah. We'll move on to the next book here but first I want to check. All right, Carlos did not hit me up. So, looks like I'm going solo today. Our next book, Marxism and the National Question. It'd be like essential reading. It goes over a lot of the same things as Foundations of Leninism, so I won't recap too much because we already talked about that. But it talks about how imperialism is the primary contradiction in the world and how Marxists need to support anti-colonial movements and movements for self-determination and struggles against imperialism, even in non-socialist countries. Yeah. But it also debunks a lot of ideas about autonomy and what autonomy means. And it debunks this idea that I think has been, still around today, although, in different forms. But the idea of like national cultural autonomy, that, any nation of people or any nationality of people should have apparatuses like NGOs or organs or whatever else, which just protect their cultural autonomy politically. And Stalin points out that every time, this is supported, it devolves into like ethno-nationalism and fighting between, I need to change this, sorry. Fighting between these different groups for land, and each group is supportive of a nationality. Because anytime you divide the workers by, anything other than class, well, that's not true because there are women's movements and, real grassroots movements for minority rights. And Stalin talks about those and the need for those in this book. But when you have an organ that's trying to assert cultural autonomy politically, it devolves into fighting and it devolves into nationalism. So Stalin's saying we are not nationalists, we don't support nationalism, but we do support self-determination and sovereignty first, even before socialism, right? We won't overthrow a country so that we can implement socialism because we support their sovereignty, we support their self-determination. But he does say that, because of this, minority groups need to be allowed to have their cultural practices, right? They need to be allowed to have their traditions. And that doesn't mean traditions that are violent and are harmful, like one that the conservatives and people like Christopher Hitchens were blowing the whistle, or I guess screaming about a while back, in order to try and justify Iraq and the other horrible wars of intervention in the Middle East. But people were saying female genital mutilation, is a practice that's practiced by certain Muslim groups, So Stalin says not every cultural tradition is something we need to respect and keep around, but countries do need to be allowed to practice their religion and their different cultural practices, and they should have a right to do that. And we, as socialists, should support that right. And this is the position of socialism towards what Stalin calls the problem of minorities, which, sounds bad, and a lot of liberals might freak out at the name of that chapter, but just what he means is, anytime you have a nationality or a group of people who are a minority in a country who don't constitute the majority, there are struggles and oppression, and under capitalism, increased forms or focused forms of exploitation based on that result from that. So the position of socialists towards these minority groups should be to allow them to have self-determination, to allow them to practice their cultural and religious traditions, and also have them tied in with the economic construction, have them involved in production, have them involved in governance, because socialism is having the masses of society govern the society and control production and the means of production and control their own destiny. So invite all these groups into that process and make them feel like they're actually involved in that process democratically. So that they'll support the socialist construction, which China is made up of 51 different national groups, and those national groups have all supported economic construction. And you have separatist groups like the ETIM in Xinjiang, who have stuck around because of the U.S., who have gotten arms from the Mujahideen, who the U.S. was funding to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, who have benefited from that arms trade from the U.S. to the Mujahideen, and who the U.S. took off their list of global terrorist groups a few years ago, sometime like 2016, whenever they were trying to incite violence in Xinjiang to try and support these separatist movements in China. But even despite the U.S. backing things like that and the most horrible terrorist groups, by bringing economic construction to these places and giving people democracy and allowing people to have their own cultural and religious practices, China has been able to keep these 51 different national groups in support of the PRC and in support of the party and the government. Yeah, I never understood the hard-nosed idea that religion shouldn't be allowed at all. That's just like within the party. People mistake that, like the Chinese Party of Communists does that too. They don't allow hyper religious people in the party necessarily. They'll vet people, and if people's religious understanding, if they have dogmatism, which is affecting their understanding of Marxism and therefore affecting their understanding of the world, then they're not allowed within the Communist Party, who's supposed to be educating people theoretically and engage or planning economic construction and things like this. You can't have a dogmatic understanding, because that starts to dismantle the party, right? That starts to make the party weaker. But the party isn't the government necessarily, and the party isn't all the people, right? China has 95 million people in their party, but that's not the entirety of their society. It's just a fraction of their society, who work together cohesively and are deeply connected to the masses of society. But that doesn't mean everyone in the masses, is deeply involved in communist organizing and communist economic struggle. I mean, they are, as a product of being part of the masses of China, and generally the people understand that. But it's not like everybody's just waking up and reading communist theory every day, the way most of the Communist Party members in China are. And those, the masses are allowed to practice whatever religion they want or hold whatever beliefs they want. As Vijay Prashad points out, there are like Jeffersonian liberals in China. There are all sorts of different political and economic opinions. But if you're a Jeffersonian liberal, you're not allowed within the Communist Party, right? You're not allowed to have a position of leadership within the Communist Party. You have to be a communist. And similarly, if you think that that society or modes of production develop and change because of the hand of God, or because God is making these decisions on a day-to-day basis, and because of that we have to pray every day as part of our economic construction. If you're suggesting ideas like this, I don't know, just like dogmatically religious ideas that are anti-Marxist and go against Marxist principles, they're not going to let you in the party either. Those are kind of some random ideas that I came up with. I don't know if anybody actually says that. But yeah. Oh, one other thing about Marxism and the national question. It reminds me of the debate that I had with Vush, when he was acting like I was crazy for saying that the U.S. had held the DPRK in a state of warfare, or kept them in a state of self-defense ever since the Korean War. By occupying South Korea and lining North Korea's border with troops and enforcing the economic sanctions. And Vaush was like, what? What? You're saying North Korea, not evil, bad comic book villains? Oh, and it blew his mind. But what I explained was that Marxists first, before we support economic construction or civil and political rights, we support self-determination. The right of a people to determine their own government and their own system. And then, The second things Marxists support is economic construction, and then out of that you get civil, political, and human rights, which grow out of having economic construction. You can't have civil, political, human rights in a country with no economic construction, where everybody's in horrible poverty. It's like the U.S., land of the free, where everybody owns a bunch of debt to the banking oligarchy, and we have more people in prisons than anywhere else. So anyways, I was explaining to Vaush, even if North Korea or the DPRK wasn't socialist, I would still support their self-determination versus the U.S. Because the U.S. has been trying to overthrow them and steal their sovereignty, steal their self-determination for years, while portraying Korea or North Korea as the undemocratic dictatorship, as if, it's democratic to kill 20% of a country's population and level their infrastructure to try and overthrow them because you don't like socialism. So I was explaining that to Vaush, right? The U.S. doesn't have the right to overthrow them or prevent their economic construction with economic sanctions, because I support their self-determination and their sovereignty. That's the roots of the tree. That's the roots which socialism can grow out of. And yeah, Stalin's Marxism and the national question reminded me of that. And then it reminded me of countries like Iran, right? Iran, where like 70 to 80% of their major industry and their banks are owned by the state, and where they're forging very, very, very close ties with Venezuela, and increasingly forging ties with China and these socialist countries who are battling imperialism and being attacked by the U.S. And people ask, why do you support Iran? It's like, I don't support Iran's ideology, right? The ideology of their government. It's not my ideology, but that doesn't mean I support the U.S. overthrowing them. That doesn't mean I think that their economic construction should be taken away, should be obliterated, and U.S. transnationals should be allowed to exploit the crap out of Iran. So I do support Iran to that extent, to the extent that they're anti-imperialist. Same with like the recent thing in the Donbass and with Russia. I do support Russia to the extent that they're protecting people in the Donbass and helping the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, who have asked for their sovereignty and have asked for self-determination for years, and have been fighting a war for self-determination for years, against the U.S. propped up and the U.S.-backed fascist militia groups in Ukraine. I do support the Russian military operation and those people to the extent that they're bringing sovereignty and economic construction to the Donbass. No, that doesn't mean I think Russia is a socialist country. No, that doesn't mean I think Vladimir Putin is a great communist. I don't agree with their government ideologically, but I do agree with with them having the right to self-determination and for their people being allowed to determine their own system. So yeah, really, really important book. Important because we're in the era of imperialism, right? But important right now with what's going on in Ukraine and the Donbass, and what's going on with Iran, and the whole multipolar alliance, right? The whole alliance against the U.S. Because there are Marxist-Leninist countries like the DPRK and Vietnam. Well, Vietnam actually isn't. I wouldn't even throw them in the multipolar alliance. They're socialists, but they trade with the U.S. a lot, and they don't have great relations with China at all. But either way, China is part of the anti-imperialist multipolar alliance that's combating U.S. hegemony and dominance. They're Marxist-Leninist, DPRK in Cuba, and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua aren't Marxist-Leninist, but they're staunch anti-imperialist, started as an actual revolutionary guerrilla movement. So those countries are like staunch socialists, but then even Venezuela, they're not Marxist-Leninist. Chavez wasn't calling himself a socialist until 2005, until he started studying Marxism and socialism and realizing the threat that U.S. imperialism was, and these Western capitalists realizing how nefarious and opportunist they were, and how they would, capitalists within his own country would jump at the opportunity to overthrow Chavez and help the U.S. overthrow Chavez if it brought them more money. So this is started when he started to go towards socialism. But even Venezuela is considered the hard anti-imperialist left in Latin America. There are also countries like Chile, or Boric in Chile. And I guess this is different than what I was saying before, because those countries are more like electoral and social democratic movements who actually have still showed support to U.S. imperialism. But what I was saying was, in this anti-imperialist multipolar alliance, you have actual socialist countries and then some actual Marxist-Leninist countries. And then you have countries like Iran and Russia, who aren't Marxist-Leninists, but who are going against U.S. economic sanctions, or going against the U.S.'s wishes in selling energy and trading with these countries. And Russia has nationalized so much of their energy sector, and so much of the economy that was plundered by Western transnational corporations during the dissolution of the USSR. Um, Putin has taken control of a lot of these firms back and reinvested them in developing the Russian economy. And again, going back to the tree diagram that starts with self-determination, and grows up into economic construction, I support Russia to the extent that they, deserve self-determination, and that they're engaging in economic construction against the wishes of the Western capitalists, and supporting, other countries who are engaging in economic construction despite the wishes and the efforts of imperialism. And it doesn't matter that not all those countries are socialist. It doesn't matter that Iran and Russia are socialist, because guess what? I can point to Russia selling oil to Venezuela, or helping, protect the people's sovereignty in Syria against the U.S. proxy war. I can point to specific actions like that Russia's doing and say, yeah, that is good. I support that for these reasons. That doesn't mean I'm giving blanket support to everything that Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation have ever done. And, this needs to be said now, because there are imperialist liars who will say, because you supported one thing that Russia and Iran did, you support the supreme leader of Iran, and you support Vladimir Putin and everything they do, and you support them because you're evil and you're violent and you don't care about people. So because of these imperialist liars who will smear us, you have to say, just because I support Russia's economic construction doesn't mean I support everything they do. So yeah, there's me saying that. Don't want to interrupt your train of thought. No, you're good. I need to take a break and read the chat here. Take a break from my rants. But I don't want to disrupt the train of thought, but I am curious about your views on whether or not the Midwest and the Great Lakes will be like one Belgium-like state, or two separate ones post-U.S. balkanization. I mean, I don't think dismantling of the U.S. empire has to necessarily include like balkanization, because the economy is already tied together, and the economy needs to be more tied together. I do think you split it into different states so people get self-determination, and obviously any minority groups, or any like indigenous nations who want like self-determination, who want their area of land, that obviously makes sense. I don't know what it would look like, and I don't see anybody really, even the people who are super big into supporting land back, or just the concept of land back. I never see like an actual concrete idea of what the U.S. would look like after that. So yeah, the idea seems a lot of it unscientific to us, which has been our critique of it. But yeah, definitely I could see them splitting the U.S. into certain like separate states that could more easily be governed, because our federal government has a difficult time. It's a huge swath of land to have to govern, a lot of people to have to govern. Obviously, socialists, we want more localized control, more democratic control, more control directly with the masses, with the workers. But ultimately, like what I was saying before, is like in the Midwest, we produce so much food. So we need to increase production of food here, increase agricultural techniques and development. But then we need to connect the U.S. to the major cities, the major hubs of economic development and of economic activity, where the most markets are. So not only can we bring food to the cities, for cheaper and for people who need it, but also that helps the farmers in the U.S. and that brings in the Midwest, and brings economic construction to the rural areas. So political sovereignty in the U.S. in a revolutionary period would be hard to figure out, and it would that would have to be something that's settled in the revolutionary period, based on what what Marxism has said about the national question, and the different groups within the U.S. who are advocating for their own self-determination. And we would have to but the revolution will also have to be somewhat centralized too. So at first it would have to be centralized, and then we'd have to construct the democratic system kind of sort of from the ashes, not from the ashes from what we had before, um but yeah, again, I think the main thing we need to focus on and pitch to people is economic interconnection and economic development, connecting the Midwest and the agricultural rural sections to the cities, connecting places that have almost no economic activity, where the people are in poverty, to places with economic activity. So yeah, I guess I see that as a lot more important than like balkanizing the U.S. Ultimately, we just want democracy and self-determination. Um, and yeah, I'm not gonna like make a map of what I think the balkanized U.S. would look like, I guess. I think the boundaries would go back to the original boundaries. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It would be up to the people, the people who currently exist today. Hope you can do a stream with Bad Empanada soon. That would be fun. I don't like Bad Empanada's takes on most things. I don't know if I've ever seen. I've seen one Bad Empanada video I like. The one about Che Guevara. That one was good. But balkanization leads to war. See, that's the main question I have, actually, and that goes back to what we were talking about with Marxism and the national question, and how national cultural autonomy, letting groups have like these political organs who battle it out on the political stage for cultural rights or whatever. That's what we want to avoid, and we want to avoid like fighting devolving into nationalism and like ethnic fighting, like the balkanization of Yugoslavia led to. And I feel like that's what a lot of balkanization could lead to in the U.S. So we want to support self-determination, but not nationalism, right? Or nationalism under a new name or under a new appearance, which capitalists are absolutely going to try and, if there's a revolutionary situation, they're going to try and infiltrate left-wing groups, and make left-wing groups or push left-wing groups towards nationalism or ethnic conflict and fighting. This is what the CIA did in Yugoslavia. They were backing terrorist groups like the KLA, the most extremist separatist groups, and calling them freedom fighters fighting for self-determination. But they weren't fighting for self-determination. They were fighting for ethnic cleansing. And these are the kind of ideologies that the controlled opposition in the U.S. left would push, especially as we get closer to a pre-revolutionary or a revolutionary period of history. Ultimately, mass participatory democratic consultation. Yeah, baby. You should go on the deprogram pod. I think there's a lot of good conversation that would come out of that. I would love to, especially because those guys are really popular. They have a huge audience who I would love to meet. Yeah. Like Bezos funded land back movements. Exact. And the problem I think a lot of people fell into with the land back debate, and we were guilty of this too, and we had to do self-criticism and reassess and change our tactics, because everybody supports self-determination, right? Or everybody who's a good Marxist supports self-determination. And if there are nations of indigenous people within the U.S. who want self-determination, we support their self-determination, as long as they still want economic construction. And then we'll socialism can offer them economic construction too. Everybody supports that, right? What people are skeptical about is various NGOs who are using hashtag land back that are being funded by capitalists, and are not run by working class indigenous people, but are run by various capitalists and or boards of various capitalists. And a few of the capitalists may be indigenous, and that's why these NGOs feel like they have legitimacy. But it's still a capitalist. Not saying they don't deserve sovereignty, but you have to watch out for what these NGOs are actually advocating for. And a lot of them are just advocating for a transfer of land from either public lands to a capitalist, or from one capitalist to another. On the grounds that the land should belong to the indigenous capitalists. it's NGOs and it's capitalism co-opting left-wing movements and legitimate movements for self-determination, and a legitimate movement for land back, which is what socialism's all about: land redistribution, giving the land back to the people. So there's NGOs and capitalists who are going to co-opt that and use it for their own interests and use it against actually giving land back to the people. So yeah, there you go. That's my analysis of land back. I'm glad we brought up the most controversial issue from Twitter 6 to 8 months ago. I hope we all start talking about it again. Just kidding. For those who don't know, that was just a huge controversial debate on social media and everywhere in leftist and Marxist circles for a while ago. And we came out against the land back NGOs while in support of self-determination for indigenous people. And, people thought we were against self-determination for indigenous people. We were like, what? We never said that. But, the way that we were presenting our arguments was bad and wrong. So. Oh, I was there. I'm glad I wasn't the only one. All right, y'all. Our last book. Our last one for today. The last book that I've read this summer before I get started on Hegel and another Parenti book that is actually signed by Parenti. But this is Michael Parenti's To Kill a Nation, The Attack on Yugoslavia. So there was a debate that went down about Yugoslavia a while back, actually, and I didn't get as into it, or I didn't throw myself into it that much. It was mostly on TikTok, but also on Twitter, because I didn't know that much about it. I didn't know the history of Yugoslavia. I didn't know the history of NATO's intervention. I knew that Michael Parenti had split with Bernie over Bernie's support of the bombings of Yugoslavia. And I knew the 1999 or the 2000 NATO bombing, the bombing in the late 90s and the early 2000s, or maybe not early 2000s, maybe they ended in the late 90s. I think they ended in the late 90s. Either way, I knew those bombings were bad, and I knew those bombings targeted Yugoslavia's industry and competitors to the United States, and they targeted the remaining socialist parts of Yugoslavia and their economy, or mostly of Serbia. What I didn't know was the entire history, and that Yugoslavia, like almost every other example of a U.S. overthrowing a socialist country, almost all of the accusations against Yugoslavia were greatly exaggerated by the U.S. media, conflated out of proportion in order to justify war and horrific bombings. And really, the U.S. was backing the most horrendous extremist terrorist groups on the ground every step of the way. Every single step of the way. And the U.S. has just, the propaganda machine has once again, even had pulled the wool over my eyes for a while, and made it difficult for me to see what NATO had actually done in Yugoslavia. But Parenti, using just a mountain of sources in this book, just debunks so many of the absurd Western imperialist narratives. And he talks about the ethnic fighting that was going on in the Balkans or in Yugoslavia at the time. And he says there were real nationalist groups, right? There were Serbian nationalist groups, there were Albanian nationalist groups. There were nationalist groups actually fighting each other, actually trying to do ethnic cleansing, and the U.S. didn't lie about that. But it wasn't Milosevic, and there were Serbian groups who were doing that. But the death count among the Albanians and the Serbs was roughly equal throughout the entirety of the conflict. Versus the U.S. narrative was that the Serbs were ethnically cleansing the Albanians, so we had to go in and bomb the shit out of the Serbs. When the U.S. is backing the KLA, who years before they started giving them funding and weapons, the U.S. had listed as a terrorist group. But once it becomes convenient for the U.S. to back these Albanians because they're fighting the Serbian nationalists as well as the Milosevic, what remained of Yugoslavia's or Serbia's socialist government at the time. Once the KLA was going against them, the U.S. took them off the terrorist list and gave them a bunch of arms and guns. And the KLA was like openly supporting ethnic cleansing or the extermination of Serbian people. These are the people that the U.S. is backing and giving them support, air support via bombs, because apparently the Serbians are ethnically cleansing them, right? When the U.S. is backing the KLA, an Albanian group who openly are supporting ethnically cleansing the Serbs, and so yeah, it's just interesting, or not interesting, but it's terrible, and it's the same pattern as always. The U.S. is talking about how Leader A or Group A is so terrible that if we don't take them out or bomb the crap out of their country, they're just going to continue to kill people for years and they'll be the worst dictator ever. And it's the worst thing ever. And then you look at what's actually happening, and the U.S. and NATO are backing people like the Mujahideen, who would splinter into Al-Qaeda, or they're creating ISIS, or they're supporting the KLA or the Azov battalion in Ukraine. They're supporting literally far-right extremist fascists who are carrying out the U.S.'s interests on the ground. And Yugoslavia is no different. And I don't know, there were a lot of really, really powerful parts about this book, but I think probably the best part was when he's explaining what the U.S. bombings in Yugoslavia actually targeted. Because along with the U.S.'s funding and arming of the KLA, an actual like nationalist extremist group, the bombing of these certain targets are what really exposed the U.S. hypocrisy and the imperialist lies more than anything. Because the U.S. is supposedly targeting only military targets, right? And only if they're targeting industry, it's only industry that's producing tanks or weapons or guns for the nationalists who are trying to ethnically cleanse people and kill people. But Parenti goes through what was actually targeted. They bombed 167, I believe is the number, state-owned factories, publicly owned factories. Factories where what's produced is either sold on the world market or given to the people and then reinvested in developing the country of Yugoslavia, their infrastructure, their education system, things that benefit the people. That's what the U.S. targeted. Not a single transnational firm was hit. Not a single business owned by a Western company. So they can, and some people have said, oh, NATO didn't mean to bomb those factories. Then why did they hit 167 of the public factories and 0 of the private factories, the transnational factories? It's because that was U.S. capital. And they were never protecting human rights in Yugoslavia. They were protecting U.S. capital. They also bombed the socialist headquarters and the headquarters of the second biggest socialist party in Serbia, I believe, who supported the ruling socialist party. They bombed power plants. They bombed water sanitation facilities. They bombed agricultural facilities that were producing food, leaving them filled with toxic waste. They left the rivers and waterways filled with toxic waste. Just absolute destruction. And Parenti talks about how, in some ways it was to weaken the war effort and the resistance so that the U.S. could take over, yes. But in other ways, this was just Western capitalists using NATO to bomb their competitors. So, like, imagine if Jeff Bezos all of a sudden had competition tomorrow, like if eBay got really big and eBay started taking over Amazon, but eBay was based in Canada, and Jeff Bezos said, oh, I'm going to have NATO bomb all of eBay's headquarters and all of the eBay factories where they're producing goods that are competing with me. Basically the same idea, but with Yugoslavia. These industries were being developed, and Yugoslavia was engaging in socialist construction, as we said, using these state-run nationalized firms, the surplus created out of them, reinvesting it in developing the productive forces or the infrastructure of Yugoslavia. So over the years, they're able to produce more and sell more and more on the global market and act more and more as a competitor to US-based or Western-based transnational firms, the ones who control organizations like NATO. So, the US or NATO just bombed these factories so they couldn't produce anything anymore. 167 of them. Oh, you're using factories to develop your country's productive forces and bring people out of poverty? We'll just blow them up. And then we'll justify it by saying that, you're doing ethnic cleansing. And, we need to bomb all your civilians to stop you from doing that. Yeah. And Parenti, I don't know. it's hard to argue with a lot of what he lays out in this book. And I've read, because I've seen people, even socialists, say that, criticize this book. But I haven't found much that I think is wrong with it yet, or blatantly wrong. I think it's a really, really good and thorough history, a Marxist class analysis of the situation in Yugoslavia, and the imperialist intervention in Yugoslavia. So the conflict, or the controversy that blew up on Twitter and TikTok surrounding this book that I decided not to throw myself into, was an adult, a person named James Ray, and James makes TikTok content. I don't know how James feels about me now, but we used to not get along. Shoot, I'm trying to pull up what I want to pull up here. Well, I don't need to pull up James's TikTok. People can look up James if they want. He's big on TikTok, but he made a TikTok calling out one of the writers in the Midwestern Marx Youth League for saying that, Yugoslavia was socialist and their economy was, prosperous to various degrees. And the IMF and World Bank dismantled them from the inside using structural adjustment loans. And then, NATO and the US came in and bombed them and destroyed them and backed extremist groups to dismantle Yugoslavia. And James Ray, this giant TikToker with like 200,000 followers, I don't know how many he has now, probably more than that, but made a video calling out this high school girl for saying this and saying, no, Michael Parenti's a tanky, you're a tanky. There was ethnic cleansing going on in Yugoslavia and in Serbia. I have friends from Yugoslavia who told me this, and I trust them more than Parenti. You should delete this high school girl. And then he went to her Twitter bio and said, oh, like this explains it. And in her Twitter bio, it said writer for Midwestern Marx or whatever. So James had some beef with me, and he chose to take a shot at me through a high school writer in our youth league. I'm mad now that I couldn't respond as thoroughly as I wanted to. I couldn't. I mean, a lot of people jumped on James for that and attacked him for that. He got, thorough backlash. But I wish I could have also dismantled his arguments. I didn't really know how. And the only thing he was saying was like, I have friends from Serbia or from Kosovo. No, he was saying I have friends from Kosovo and Yugoslavia who told me a different narrative than Parenti, and I'll take their word over his. Which, fine. I mean, that's not a very good argument in a political debate, especially a public political debate. It's kind of just an appeal to someone that and it's just using liberal identity politics. And that's always how liberals, at least in the modern era, justify their intervention, say we need to for human rights. So you're kind of just repeating the arguments of the imperialists. But then, like, the first thing, when Parenti starts this book in the acknowledgments, he says, Gregory Elich and Barry Lidici, two superb Balkan specialists who did a critical reading of the text and put their deep expertise at my disposal. In doing so, they saved me from a number of false steps. I couldn't have done this on my own without. And then he goes on to list people's names for like an entire page and list. It goes on for almost 2 whole pages, or at least 1.5 pages, like the different people who helped them with the book. Most of them from former Yugoslavia. So I was like, after this debate, I was like, what the heck is this Parenti book? I mean, is this just like Parenti's one bad book that he's ever written where he doesn't use any sources except for like, I don't know, like not good sources, and tries to argue that Yugoslavia was a socialist paradise before NATO took it out? But that's not it at all. Parenti spends a lot of time criticizing Yugoslavia, talking about what they did wrong, talking about the history of their socialist construction, where it had missteps. As I said, talked about the different nationalist or extremist groups and the people they killed. Talked about Milosevic's connection to them, or talked about when there was no connection to them. Just not saying Milosevic was leading those groups like the U.S. said he was. I'm just saying, to the extent that there was a connection or an alliance at various times between them, Parenti acknowledges it. You know, he's heavily critical of Yugoslavia and the Balkans. He's just pointing out the lies of the U.S. and how the U.S., you know, did not need to carpet bomb this country and dismantle this country like they did. So James Ray was wrong when he attacked that high schooler, and the high schooler was correct. But I wasn't able to defend the high schooler because I hadn't done my reading. But now I have, so maybe I'll end up in that exact situation again someday. But yeah, that's all I've read this summer. Now I'm getting into some Hegel, lectures on the history of philosophy. Reading Hegel is super fun, super not complicated, and I definitely don't have to read every paragraph 4 times before I understand it. Just kidding, I do. Shout out to Hegel. Hey Eddie, given the fact that the oversimplified version of Cold War is just capitalist dogmatic propaganda, would you be willing to react to oversimplified's version of the Russian Revolution? Probably. Especially now that I've been reading about it. That sounds like interesting. An interesting video. What am I looking for right now? Oh, my water. Ah, man, my mouth gets so dry. Ranting about the FBI and the CIA. So yeah, those are all the books I've read this summer. Now I'm getting into Hegel. And Capital Volume 2 a little bit. I didn't expect that to take me 2 hours and 10 minutes to go through all those books, but oh well. It was fun talking about them. All right, let's see here. Let me check my stream playing. All right, next, let's take a look at our Reddit account. This isn't what we want here. Let's take a look at our Reddit. I've been checking our Reddit page every day on the stream. Not every day, but every time we stream. Just to see if people post anything they want us to react to, anything that they like. Yeah, I don't know if I'm at the right place. r/Midwestern Marx. That's what we want. 452 members. Wow, we're famous, y'all. Nope, nothing new on there yet. But yeah, if you want us to react to anything, put it in here. Oh, what do we have here? Do we have something new? No. That's an advertisement. So yeah, I've been checking it every day, and I will continue to, unless nobody uses it at all. Whoops, I forgot to show y'all. There it is. There's my abs. Woohoo. I don't know. I can't remember who made this. It wasn't us. So it's made by the fans, the viewers, which is why it's a picture of me shirtless. But yeah, that's the Reddit. Be sure to post stuff there if you want to see it in the future. I almost just closed out of StreamYards. I don't want to do that. Nice abs. Thank you. Thank you, comrade. All right, so now I checked the Reddit. I wanted to show y'all this for a couple of reasons. Carlos was recently interviewed by a Russian show called The Tribune. Oh, this is The Tribune. Okay, somebody was talking to me about The Tribune earlier, and I thought they meant the Orinoco Tribune. But I guess it's a show online created by Russian communists. And Carlos was a little nervous about this interview at first, so I'm glad to hear people say they liked it, because he's just like, they had to basically voice him over, you know, so he didn't know if they like, they could have taken his words and made him to say something else in Russian, you know. So he was worried about that, but apparently they didn't. They did a good job. One sec, I want to listen to it for a sec. I still haven't watched this.
It was fairly big. So socialism looked like it could take.
Okay, yeah. So this version's in English, but the Russian version is in. They have like a voiceover in Russian for Carlos, I guess, and he was nervous about that. But yeah, so that was cool, and it was just making me laugh thinking about the recent study. There was a study published in Oxford talking about or accusing Max Blumenthal, Richard Medhurst, and other independent journalists, journalists who actually tell the truth, journalists who don't lie and who expose the US and the Western Empire. This study accused them of being Russian disinformation launderers, people who spread Russian disinformation around the West to get people to support the Russian war effort, and they support Putin propaganda. And I made a video about this, and I was like, hey, I got my TikTok taken down when I was talking about US influence in the State Department's actions in Ukraine prior to the Russian military operation in Ukraine, and my account got taken down. So there, even if this wasn't like direct censorship from the State Department, there is censorship going on. If the State Department's creating bot accounts or astroturfing certain posts, they can have people be mass reported or mass flagged or whatever, and they can manipulate social media algorithms in various ways that way. And then also the social media companies are owned by like Silicon Valley oligarchs, capitalists. So they have their own interests. What was I talking about? I don't even remember what I was talking about. Richard Medhurst. Okay, so there's various ways that the State Department and the Democratic Party and the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, is now moving to censor people, censor anti-imperialist journalists. And one of the ways that they're doing that is by accusing people of laundering Russian disinformation, accusing people who are anti-imperialist of just spreading Putin propaganda and therefore being attached to the Kremlin, being attached to the Russian government. And we've seen Twitter has started labeling pretty much every good journalist that I follow has now been labeled as Russian state media. So what that implies is that they're connected to the Russian state, funded by the Russian state, propped up by the Russian state. So yeah, we've increasingly seen people being called assets or puppets of Putin in order to silence them. And I made a video about Richard Medhurst and Max Blumenthal and this new study that came out of Oxford accusing them of being puppets of Putin. And one of the comments I received on TikTok, which is not the number one place for highly intellectually rigorous debates, but so I guess I should have expected this. But one of the first TikTok comments said, Eddie, Max Blumenthal and Richard Medhurst have literally done interviews with RT. Russia Today, or is it the Russian Times? They're obviously assets of the Kremlin, puppets of Putin, Russian propagandists. Like Carlos has done interviews on RT. I promise you, Midwestern Marx and Carlos are not getting a dime from the Russian government or from Putin. If we were, Carlos would be wearing nicer fedoras and earrings than this. Just kidding. But, we're just scraping by here. We are not being financed by the Russian government and by Putin. Just because Carlos did an interview on RT or did an interview for this Russian show, The Tribune. Like, is that really... Well, are Americans, the American masses, really at the point of brainwashing where they'll believe that? Where they'll believe that talking to a Russian person means that you are a puppet of Vladimir Putin? Or that talking or doing an interview for the Russian media means that you are influenced and controlled by the Russian State Department? Meanwhile, the US media is flooded with literal generals in the military, with people or with higher ups in the Pentagon. These are the kind of people who come on MSNBC to talk about foreign policy. We watched a video the other day from Matt Orfelia of all of the different weapons contractors, people who work for Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, countries who make most of their money by selling weapons to the U.S. government or whoever the U.S. government is selling weapons to. Weapons contractors coming on MSNBC and the other major media outlets to argue for war in Ukraine, and specifically selling more weapons to Ukraine, which, no conflict of interest there. The people who sell the weapons are saying we should go to war so they can sell more weapons. But then that U.S. establishment who supports stuff like that and thinks the U.S. media and the private U.S. media like MSNBC and CNN, the liberal media, would never lie to us. They're just calling balls and strikes. They're just saying the facts. You know, the people who believe that and who will argue that will say that you're a Russian state asset if you do an interview on RT. Like, dude, Russophobia infantile, absolutely. The amount of Russophobia is out of control. Like, people in this country just think Russia is literally a comic book villain. I named my kitten after Vladimir Lenin. And you should see the side eyes I get from my neighbor as I'm calling for Vlad at the window. That's awesome. Come here, Vladimir Lenin. Come read State and Revolution. There's a lot of state-owned media companies, and they're all good at reporting dirt on other countries. That is facts. That is just inarguably true. I kind of want to play the song that someone sent me the other day before we watch another video. Actually, I saw this song forever ago on Twitter. And then Andy, comrade Andy, who we had on the show the other day, she sent it to me again yesterday, and I was laughing.
إلها تنزل النيوان اللي تفلسطين كمان وبقي تنزل النيوان بنكسر أنف الأمريكا مصانعين الطيارات يا مدير اهجموا قوة.
So earlier when I was talking about Gaddafi, and I was saying you need to read non-liberal, anti-liberal thinkers outside of the West and outside of Marxist-Leninists. Read other anti-liberal thinkers. This is what I mean. We say to China, why don't you invade Taiwan to smash the nose of the Americans? You know, you need to see that there are anti-imperialists out there who are just openly supporting, you know, like, yes, Putin's doing a good thing in the Donbass, knocking back the Americans. And, you know, China should just invade Taiwan before the U.S. uses it to try and destroy China. Anti-liberal, not Marxist-Leninist, but still very interesting. Just kidding. That's not exactly what I mean when I say that. I just think that video is freaking hilarious. The way they're literally just singing, also China invade Taiwan. And most American liberals are like, oh, 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 China's imperialism, communism, they support Putin. Most liberals would explode. They support Putin? Why don't you support the Azov Battalion and the U.S. Empire and the U.S. coup governments in Ukraine? The U.S. should invade North Korea. They already did, and they lost, son. Why would they go back for another L? When this time China would probably get involved a lot sooner. Okay, I hope you all liked that that little detour there, that comedy relief. Ooh, I got another good video I wanted to watch that is not super serious, but are not really super politically insightful. And then we can watch this myths about the Soviet Union because that looks interesting too. But this just popped up. Obviously, I play guitar. So like, I get a lot of music videos. And a lot of good music videos get recommended to me. And this is one I saw today. It's the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian, which, you know, Sumeria was ancient society, pre-Roman society. The Romans, you know, sort of look back on Sumerians sort of the same way we would look back on Rome today, as like sort of an ancient people who were somewhat developed, but not to the extent that the Romans were. So this is a song that's made it, the Epic of Gilgamesh is a Sumerian song that's been passed down through generations. It kind of gives you an idea of, more of an idea of what Sumeria was like, the music they'd listen to, or the kind of lyrics they would write from a Sumerian perspective, someone in that society. So it's really, really cool. And I like the music too. Hopefully this isn't copyright. I don't know who owns the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian. Gotta get more water. I'll be back. Enjoy the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's good, isn't it? Pretty cool, huh? The thing I like about that too, or I saw a comment that I really liked, I guess, that said, the Romans are ancient to us, and the Sumerians would have been ancient to the Romans, and the Epic of Gilgamesh is a Sumerian song about what would have been ancient to them. So, that's them sort of translating their history through song in a way that's lasted all the way to today. But it's them, contemplating or talking about ancient society. So it even gives us an idea of what the Sumerians' concept of history was like. So yeah, really cool video. Not something that we normally watch, but I definitely think it was worth it to show that. And obviously, go watch the full video if you want to see the full thing. But yeah. Hope y'all like. I can also play a song called "The Epic of Lil Peep." Oops. I'm not playing very good right now, y'all. I need more practice. I've been practicing too much Spanish lately for my upcoming trip. My guitar's falling off, for real. Music time, brah. Yeah, definitely. Gotta have a musical interlude at some point. Just some kind of music break. Ryan Tracy, thank you again for the super chat. Thank you for your financial support. What do you think about Eurodollar theory? I don't know what it is. I'm sorry, Ryan. I wish I could answer your super chat. This is the first super chat question that I haven't been able to answer. And I've been thinking, what should I do when someone eventually answers me a super chat and I don't know? So I've been thinking I'll write it down in my handy dandy planner. I'll look it up next time. And then I'll get you on the next stream. I'll explain what I think Eurodollar theory is. Go ahead and explain it to me in the chat if you think it's something I could understand just and give a reaction to off the top of my head. If not, if it's something that's going to take some research, I will research it for you. Not for you, but for everyone. For myself, too. We're all getting smarter together. I've learned so much from making these videos or making videos and content. It's insane. It's really crazy. Got her. Roscoe Dash. Yugoslavia is heavily mixed. Midwestern Marx. Thank you. Where are you headed, Eddie? I cannot say yet. I cannot say. I've already given away that it's a Spanish-speaking country, but I'm pumped. It's basically the idea that dollar hegemony does not come out of the U.S. Oh, yeah, that's definitely something that's going to take some research and study to get an opinion on. There's a good article about the petrodollar, but I'm going to have to revisit it. I don't want to say anything before I read up on that, because I've been reading more about dollar. Or not, I've been reading more, but I've read a lot of things over the years about dollar hegemony and where it comes from. So that sounds really interesting to look into, and I will. And I tried to look into that with crypto because I was like, maybe crypto is like maybe crypto could be revolutionary, but it's not. It's just like a decentralized form of currency, basically like privatizing the currency, or just allowing people to create a currency bubble. I am ready if you are open to a conversation about how ideologies are often used as weapons to suspend our ability to cooperate and distinguish representations that don't polarize groups as the means to gain power, but does criticize the overall elites and their ideas. Yeah, I'm down for that at some point. Ideologies are often used as weapons to suspend our ability to cooperate, distinguish representatives. They don't polarize. I tried emailing you before, but never got a response. We'll definitely be open to talking with you. Oh, I remember we got an email a while back from someone who wanted to talk about something. And Carlos said, do you want to do it? And I said, yes. Maybe it was you.
Thank you very much. Chat.
What's the name of your email? Send me the name of your... actually, don't send me the name of your email. Just send me another email. Send midwesternmarks@gmail.com another email with your full proposition, so I can prepare for it, and we can, decide, do we have a moderator? What are we going to do debate questions or just a conversation? What are we going to talk about like that? Because I like to have everything planned before I do it. Not everything necessarily with the stream, but with guests, I like to have it all planned out. So. Phelps 566. Okay, I'll just look at it later then. Let me write it down. Because I want to do some debates or some at least just talk to people who aren't Marxists or people who disagree with me. Because that's something we don't have on the show very often. We obviously have people that Carlos and I like and that we agree with most often, which we're always going to have those people most often, but it'd be nice to talk with some people who we disagree with, No promises, but I will check it out. I'm not a Marxist. No! You should be, so you can be right about stuff. Libs will call you a fascist in the same sentence that they used to defend the Azov. Yeah, no kidding. That's what's so funny about the modern liberals, or the synthetic left, so-called leftists or Marxists who aren't really, who are just liberals in reality. They will, they'll accuse anyone of being a fash. They'll accuse literally anyone of being a fash. He's a fash. You're a fash. Everyone who voted for Trump is a fash. But then, you'll be like, the Azov battalion are fascist. They're like, no, they just have some right wingers in their ranks or in their leadership. They have some far right origins, but they kicked all the right wingers. I had someone literally say that they kicked all the right wingers out of Azov battalion. I'm like, oh yeah, did you go to Ukraine and check? Did you go and talk to every single member of the Azov battalion and you decided that no more Nazis are in there? Did you make them take off their shirts? Because a lot of them have swastika tattoos. But apparently, the openly, avowedly neo-Nazi, ethno-nationalist militias, they're not fascist, but, anybody who voted for Trump in the U.S. is a fascist, including like a couple of my uncles who work at, like one of my uncles who works at a car dealership. I guess he's a fascist now because he voted for Trump one day. Literally covered black suns and swastikas. Literally. Most Ukrainians sing the song Bandera is our father. Right. There's someone named Falun Gong Uncensored. If anyone needs a recap on what the Falun Gong is, just watch Big Trouble in Little China. I remember the day I learned what the Falun Gong was. I was like at work when I was a COVID tester, and I could like do research and read, in between when people would come in and have me swab their nose. And I learned what the Falun Gong was. I'm like, this can't be real. This has to be like a conspiracy or something. And I made a TikTok about it. And of course, because I was talking about something interesting, something that's actually interesting and a big deal, it didn't go viral because only stupid crap goes viral on TikTok. But I was like, how are people not, how is this not crazy? This organization, this anti-China organization is connected to QAnon. And they've been spending millions of dollars supporting QAnon, supporting Donald Trump, and then supporting anti-China imperialist propaganda. And then the liberal media who tells us that January 6th was a legitimate coup attempt and the worst threat to democracy ever in human history. And, everybody who voted for Trump is an extreme, insane right-winger who you shouldn't even talk to. They use Falun Gong reporting. They use stories produced by the Falun Gong and then blow them up all over the media. Like, the China organ harvesting thing, the idea that the Chinese government was killing people and harvesting their organs, that was Falun Gong. That was like this, and they're also like a religious cult. They're like a cult who has some belief that Trump was like sent by God to destroy China. And liberal media hates everything that they stand for in terms of QAnon and Trump or whatever, but apparently they trust them when it comes to China, and they publish their China stories without any critical thinking at all. It's craziness. It's like Jim Jones Hong Kong style. It wasn't for Donald Trump before it started. No, but they did support QAnon and Trump, and the liberals, were against that. And there was actually like an NBC article or MSNBC, like kind of exposing the Falun Gong for their Trump support. But then you look deeper into it, and it's like, well, Falun Gong connected NGOs or people directly from the Falun Gong or news stories produced directly by the Falun Gong are also being reported by MSNBC and CNN and these liberal outlets. So why do you trust these guys when it comes to China? Epic Times. Yes, the Epic Times is the Falun Gong's like propaganda arm. Yes. We'll have to go work to spread class consciousness. I'll watch the stream later. Thank you, Fernando. You got this. We believe in you. Thank you for watching the stream. Solidarity. Go get after it. Go organize those workers. Bring them theoretical education. You got this. Falun Gong thinks the afterlife is segregated by race. Oh my goodness. All right. Thoughts on Assad? We were talking about self-determination earlier, and Assad is the democratically elected leader of Syria, and the U.S. has tried to back extremist terrorist groups to overthrow Assad. It hasn't worked, and obviously there are criticisms of Assad because, and Assad has killed people because he's fighting in a civil war, as the U.S. is occupying the oil fields in Syria, and the U.S. largely played a hand in creating ISIS in that area. I support the sovereignty of the people. I don't support everything Assad does, but I support him over the terrorist groups, and his Ba'athist socialism over the terrorist groups, backed by the imperialist capitalist West. And I think that Russia sending in their military at the request of Assad to help support Syrian sovereignty against the U.S. is also something I think is good, not bad, and anti-imperialist, because of what we were talking about when we were talking about Marxism and the National Question, which is right here by Stalin, because imperialism is the primary contradiction in the world. And just because a country isn't socialist doesn't mean that they don't deserve self-determination. We should always support their self-determination and anything that fights imperialism that isn't anti-socialist or anti-communist. Falun Gong is not a religion. They use religion to attack the Chinese government. Oh, got you. Any way to get back into TikTok? I'm on TikTok. MidwesternMarks.com is our TikTok. We're back up to like 45K followers. Ooh. We're actually really rolling on TikTok. So is Uyghurs. The Uyghur narrative comes from the Falun Gong, you're saying, or it largely, I agree, from Epic Times, but also like Adrian Zen's stuff is technically peer reviewed. Like I'm pretty sure you can go on Google Scholar or JSTOR or whatever, like a scholarly search engine, and Adrian Zen's material will pop up as if it's rigorous. Yep. Dang, so you know everything about the Falun Gong Uncensored. You should come on the show if you're comfortable sometime. All right, I want to react to a video. I have someone talking about why the Russo-Ukrainian conflict isn't Russian imperialism. I don't know what video would be the best video to watch on this at this point, because I've talked about it for hours and hours and hours now. But maybe the video responding to my former classmate. It's called like Eddie Liger responds to former liberal classmate about Ukraine. That's probably the best one. I don't know. You can look at any of my past lives, though. We talk about it plenty. Or watch Carlos's video with the Tribune. Oh, thank you so much, Warren West. $10 super chat. No question in the chat, just $10. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Could not do what we do. Could not bring the theoretical education to you, comrades, without your support. So thank you so much. Love y'all. Solidarity. All right, let's watch Top 5 Myths About the Soviet Union Cold War documentary. Who's this produced by? The Cold War. Yeah, I don't know much about these guys. Looks like they just do videos about the Cold War, though. Looks fairly well produced. So yeah, if anyone in the chat knows something about these guys, let me know. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat while we watch this.
In it, we all have access to the sum of human knowledge at our fingertips all the time. Of course, some people choose to use that capability to argue with strangers and look at videos of cats, but lots of us also use the internet to explore and discover new information. And there is lots of new information out there. Often it feels like too much. So much that filtering accurate information from myths or lies can be difficult. The Soviet Union as a topic is no different, with years of propaganda and lies distorting or obscuring reality. I'm your host, David, and this week we decided to take a look at 10 myths about the USSR. This is the Cold War. We're going to be talking about myths, but you know what isn't a myth? Data security. In the 21st century, it's all about information security and stable access. And the sponsor of this video, NordVPN, is all about that. Plus, 1 month free. Or very differently from how they're envisioned in the West. The USSR was a totalitarian single-party regime. This isn't a question. But as I'm sure you're...
This isn't a question. Yes, there is. There's a scholarly debate and a question over whether totalitarianism should even be used as a word, because totalitarianism was invented by Hannah Arendt, or maybe not invented by her, but she popularized the term in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, which was backed by the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the CIA and the U.S. imperialists. And the whole point of the idea of totalitarianism was to conflate communism with fascism. For the Western liberal capitalists, imperialists, to say You know, those communists who defeated Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and the fascists, they are actually the same as the fascists. They're all totalitarian. And, you know, there was recently a big survey, third-party survey that was conducted globally, asking people in various countries where or how democratic they felt like their government was. You know who scored one of the lowest in the world? The United States, the country where 93% of elections are decided by the candidate who raises the most money, and our bills and laws are written by lobbyists, corporate lobbyists who put the bills on the tables of the desks of politicians and have the politicians who are their puppets fight for them. And the country who invaded Iraq and killed millions of people and left hundreds of thousands of Americans with PTSD and thousands of young Americans dead in a war for oil oligarchs. In that country, the U.S., people feel not very democratic at all, even compared to other countries around the world. The places where people felt most democratic, well, it was various places, but China and Cuba were well near the top, both within the top 10. And I believe China was number 1 or 2. You know what those are? One-party states. Because guess what? The U.S. has 2 parties, but neither of them serve the masses or care about the masses. Both parties are subservient to the capitalist class. The ruling class economically is what controls the ruling parties politically. And yeah, there's 2 of them. That doesn't mean you have a choice, because both countries are imperialist. Both countries are capitalist. Both parties are anti-labor. You know, so you have 2 choices. You can vote for the left wing, the left flank of the bourgeoisie, the capitalist imperialists, who pretend that they're less racist than the right flank, or you can vote for the more openly brash right flank of the bourgeoisie. But that's not democracy. That's not a choice. You know, if you have a one-party state, but you have a control, or you have control in what that party does, you have a say in what that party does, you have a say in not only the politics of your country and of your locality, but you have a say in production. What's produced? How is labor organized? How do we distribute what's produced? You know, that's true democracy, is bringing people economic democracy. And that's what China and Cuba and the Soviet Union had much more of than the United States, despite being one-party states. You know, democracy does not increase the more parties you have. Democracy increases the more that the masses have equal control in the governance and of society and in societal production.
You already know, there were power struggles that went on throughout the country's history. They just didn't happen via parliaments or public debate or political campaigning, but instead happened inside the ranks of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the CPSU. It was there that ambitious party officials, bureaucrats, military and industrial leaders, former Komsomol activists, and the like would struggle against each other for more influence over the widest variety of things, be it
struggle continues in any socialist country. And it wasn't just struggle between individuals, it was struggles between groups. You know, there were individuals involved and there were, various interests involved. But there was still a bourgeoisie, right? There were still capitalists. And he says that the capitalists were involved in trying to gain influence. And there was still a proletariat. And the proletariat was, supposed to maintain a dictatorship. And at some points, people say that the Soviet party bureaucracy became disconnected from the masses, and the masses, or the working class, sort of lost their dictatorship at this time. Even though the Soviet Union was still acting more in favor of the workers, and Khrushchev was acting more in favor of the workers than any U.S. president throughout history since maybe Lincoln. But there were various struggles, because class struggle continues under socialism. And the Soviet Union and China and other socialist countries have understood this. That the struggle continues, and that the bourgeoisie is going to continue to try and regain control of the government after the working class establishes control, especially in the era of imperialism, in the stage of capitalism that we're in, the highest stage of capitalism, imperialism. Because the imperialists, the Western apparatuses of capitalism and the Western transnational corporations. And by apparatuses of capitalism or capitalist imperialism, I mean like the CIA, NED, various NGOs, things like that, are going to try and gain control of the government too, going to try and gain control of the people within the socialist bureaucracy or within the Socialist Party. So this is going to be something that the socialists constantly need to combat. They constantly need to combat the corrosive influence of the bourgeoisie on the party and the government, and the corrosive influence of the imperialist bourgeoisie trying to externally penetrate the country and control the government. The struggle always continues to keep the government or the administrative apparatuses, or organizations controlling production in socialist countries, keeping them tied to the masses, keeping them as an apparatus or a state which serves the masses and combats imperialism and the counter-revolution of the bourgeoisie. Because that struggle, that class struggle, is going to continue even after the working class or the working masses of society take state power. So yeah, it's just an issue of socialist theory, or a part of socialist theory I think everybody should know about. Under conditions of socialist construction, post-revolution, class struggle continues, and the proletariat needs to struggle and continue to work hard to maintain control of the government or the administrative apparatuses and pursue socialist construction.
Nepotism or regionalism to actual professional and effective work. Okay, so you may be wondering, what does this have to do with elections? Well, elections were held to vote for candidates at various levels of government, be it the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the Supreme Soviet of each of the republics, the Soviets of Working People's Deputies, and so on. Where the CPSU came into this is that they were one of two bodies that could nominate a candidate for election. Some public organizations which accepted CPSU leadership and the 1936 Constitution could also nominate candidates. So, who could vote? Well, the Soviet Union practiced universal suffrage, with only convicts and patients of mental institutes barred from voting. Elections were held every 4 years, and voting was done by secret ballot. But we need further explanation for clarity, don't we? In practice, voters could put a blank ballot in the box if they intended to vote for the CPSU candidate. Voters who wanted to vote, but not for the CPSU nominee, had the option to vote for none of the above. This could only be done, however, by going behind a curtain at the voting booth to manually write that on the ballot. So what you had was a binary choice, only one of which required a voter to go behind a curtain. The choice that required that just happened to be the dissenting choice, an easy way for the government to identify anyone who openly opposed the CPS.
I don't know the specifics about the Soviet voting plan, but he's going, basically saying something similar to what I said, is they still had elections. The people still had control of the apparatuses of government. It wasn't just party bureaucrats deciding everything. Mao was the one who insisted class struggle must continue under socialism. No, you're right about Khrushchev. I know you're right about Khrushchev saying, they weren't really a vanguard party anymore. They were a people's party, or they wanted to, didn't they change their policy to a policy of like humanism rather than materialist, continuing to develop dialectical materialism? I don't know. It's more based on, popular, we're going to do what's best for everyone, not just the proletariat, which led to class collaboration with the bourgeoisie, increased capitalist and imperialist control of the party. But I just finished a bunch of Stalin, and Stalin and Lenin definitely talk about class struggle continuing under socialism, 100%. They talk about it a lot. Just talk about the need of the masses to remain connected to the party and socialist construction, how the job isn't done, post-revolution. You still need to construct things, and the party always needs to remain tied to the people. And actually, right before Stalin died, he had a plan to increase party democracy, increase, the masses' connection and control over the party, mostly in economic decision making, because he felt like the party bureaucrats were making too many decisions related to economics and production, and that especially once the war was finished, more control needed to be given to the masses, the working class. And then obviously Stalin died before they could implement that, and Khrushchev gave his secret speech saying Stalin was a dictator. And I think that speech has a whole lot of lies in it, and Khrushchev is kind of a turd. But as I said, Khrushchev's still better than all the U.S. presidents. So yeah, there's a little Soviet Union ramble, I guess.
oppressive states seek some form of official legitimacy, and these elections serve the purpose well for the CPSU. That it was designed to help identify potential opponents was just a bonus. So there you have it, elections in the Soviet Union. On paper, they not only existed, but enjoyed universal suffrage and a secret ballot. It just doesn't take much digging to uncover that these elections had a different form and served a very different purpose than democratic elections in the West. Myth number 2, corruption did not exist in the Soviet Union. I find this particular notion to be quite laughable when I see it crop up in conversations, but it seems to persist at a low level, so we're including it on this list.
What? Who in the United States is running around and saying there was no corruption in the Soviet Union? I am a supporter of existing socialism. I'm a Marxist-Leninist tanky. Trust me, liberals tell me that I am every day. And I just spent like 15 minutes talking about corruption in the Soviet government. And how communists and Marxists understand that there's going to be a constant need to battle corruption and, battle capitalist or imperialist control of the government and the party and the administrative apparatuses of a socialist country. Who is saying that there's no corruption? There was no corruption in the Soviet Union. I want to find these people because I don't think they exist. China, the Marxist-Leninist, most powerful Marxist-Leninist country on the planet and the fastest growing economy on the planet. Not recently, but a few years ago, launched massive anti-corruption campaigns. Launched by Xi Jinping throughout the party, throughout the government, and throughout the party's cadres, who work directly with certain localities to make sure that those localities are getting the resources and things they need, and communicating between the central bodies of the party and the localities. There was massive anti-corruption efforts carried out in all these positions because, especially with China's market reforms and allowing some private investment from the global markets into their country, you're going to have capitalists who are going to try and lobby or control the government, or control government policy, or control the party, all of the powerful apparatuses and administrative apparatuses in China. And they're going to try and control them and manipulate them for their own interests. This is true in any socialist country. Class isn't just abolished overnight. We're not anarchists. There's going to be a continued battle to keep the party and the administrative bodies uncorrupted. So I don't know where did this person hear that where did this person hear people saying that there was no corruption in the Soviet Union? I don't know. I haven't heard it myself.
The myth itself is that levels of corruption in the Soviet Union were very low to non-existent. Often cited are the laws, regulations, and practices that forbid corruption. The fact that Stalin, at the time of his death, had very few personal possessions, really only amounting to some clothing and tobacco, is also pointed out as being proof somehow that there was no corruption. After all, Stalin was a totalitarian dictator and really could have taken whatever he wanted for himself. Of course, this argument ignores the fact that he didn't need to actually put his name on an object for him to be able to use it as his own. As a totalitarian dictator, he lived a pretty luxurious life, taking advantage.
As a totalitarian dictator, he lived a pretty luxurious life, as totalitarian dictators do. The U.S. just made up the word totalitarian, so they can make it mean whatever they want. And I only stop this because actually people don't talk about this, but Hitler and all of the higher ups in his government who were close with him massively enriched themselves in the lead up to World War II and during World War II. There was a law in Germany where if you used a stamp with Hitler's face on it, which was like all the stamps, he got paid like 50 cents in royalties. So they amassed these just massive fortunes and lived in absolute unimaginable luxury in Nazi Germany, which or fascist Germany, which some people try and say is socialist. And the U.S. was collaborating with Hitler up until the war. At least U.S. transnational capitalists were helping to enrich Hitler leading up to the war. But we always hear how evil Hitler was, and there's always so much analysis done of Hitler's personality and how could someone do something so evil. We never analyzed the class forces in Germany, though, right? And we never say that maybe part of what motivated Hitler was he was just after money, right? Because he massively enriched himself. Nope, you're not allowed to say that. Nope, you're not allowed to say that money motivates evil things because, money is always good and the market is always good. And the only evil totalitarian dictators are folks like Stalin who try and disrupt the holy market, which we must worship dogmatically. All hail the invisible hand.
Of state resources as if they were his own. For example, the state dachas reserved for the senior leadership were rebuilt and renovated several times, but were really only ever used by Stalin himself. But even if we choose to ignore that, corruption was a definite facet of Soviet.
Stalin just had them build these giant buildings and stadiums, and he would just sit in there all by himself. He was a totalitarian dictator, but he couldn't even force people to hang out with him. He would just hang out in giant buildings that he forced his slaves to build alone. That's what totalitarians do.
Life, ranging from petty bribery to nepotism to blat to falsifying cotton harvest numbers for an entire republic. So let's dig in a bit. Reports from 1970 indicated.
Come on. You're pretending to be a real historian here. You said you're going to debunk myths about the Soviet Union. And then you're going to say Stalin starved people in Ukraine, the Holodomor. Even Wikipedia, I'm pretty sure, still talks about the scholarly debate, which isn't even really a debate, as to whether the Holodomor was a famine that happened because of conditions, economic and weather conditions, or whether Stalin purposefully starved people. Like, this is a debate even within Western imperialist academia. And there are even liberal historians, anti-Soviet historians, who are like, no, the Holodomor was just a famine. It wasn't Stalin just eating all the grain so everyone starved. Come on.
That 1/4 of all crime in the Soviet Union was made up of bribery and embezzlement.
Oh, sorry. One more thing. Someone says, is it a big deal that Stalin had some nice things that were not private property? No, I don't think it's a bad thing. Socialism is obviously about economic construction. We want to produce things. We just want to produce them for their useful character, what they do for people, rather than, for selling for profit, just their value, use value versus value. So it's not bad for Marxists to own nice things, but Che Guevara got invited to some of the non-aligned countries during the 60s after the Cuban Revolution. So there were these countries like Nasser in Egypt who were nationalists, and they were like economic populists. So they wanted to carry out socialist and anti-imperialist economic policies and policies of economic construction, sort of based on what the Soviet Union had achieved, to electrify their country and do other things like that, raise people out of poverty. So they kind of formed this thing called the non-aligned movement, which allowed them to have their own voice in global politics, like in the UN. But they weren't, Marxist Leninists or socialists or part of the Soviet Union and Cuba or the socialist bloc. But Che Guevara went and toured them, and he would tell the leaders, I'm pretty sure he told Nasser himself, or maybe it was it Sukarno in Indonesia? I can't remember, but Che would tell them, you guys are living in too much luxury. This house is way too nice. You should give this to the people. It's not befitting of a socialist to live like this. This is stupid. These are the top leaders of their country who have invited Che Guevara, a foreign dignitary, to tour their capital and see their economic construction and build an alliance. And Che's like, yeah, I'm going to build an alliance, but I'm a Marxist. I'm going to criticize you guys where you're being anti-Marxist or where you're being corrupt. Don't do this. And he would just tell them to their face, because that's how Che Guevara was. One time Che Guevara was imprisoned with Fidel, and they were saying, we're going to kill you if you're communist. And Fidel was like, no, we're not communists. And Che was like, yeah, we are. I don't care. Go for it. I am a communist. Screw you. The dude, his balls were almost too big. Yeah, shout out to our boy Che. All right, let's watch a little bit more of this.
With the Soviet Supreme Court even acknowledging the existence of corruption, stating that bribery, quote, represented a major social danger and required decisive measures to eradicate it, end quote. Izvestia,
Stalin said that
regime,
too.
noted in 1974 that instances of embezzlement and irresponsible attitudes towards material goods are still quite common. And what does this mean in practice? Well, it could mean a wide range of things. There is the prominent case of Sharof Rashidov, the first secretary of the Uzbek Communist Party, who year after year exaggerated the amount of cotton produced in the Republic in order to secure large payment transfers to the Republic, which...
What about the corruption that allowed for the dissolution of the USSR? What about the capitalists who infiltrated the USSR and plundered the country afterwards when the government was selling off state-run firms for like a penny to Western transnational capitalists, and it created a human rights disaster in the Soviet Union for the masses of society? What about that corruption? No, we're not going to talk about that corruption. All right, that was an interesting video. I like how they try to, even when they're trying to give a more nuanced take on the Soviet Union, this is riddled with historical inaccuracies and various Western lies propped up by corporations and private property or propertied interests. The Holodomor. The most important factor is that it was caused by the US and UK sanctions on the Soviet Union. Literally. That's actually the best thing to bring up when people are trying to tell you that the Holodomor is real, or that it was a purposeful starvation of the people. Especially, like, you know, there are Ukrainian people who will say, my grandma survived that, or you know, I have family who died in that. And then it becomes really hard to be like, oh no, it didn't happen, you know. Because it did happen. There was a famine, you know, but say, so you don't blame the US for that famine at all, or the UK, because they were keeping sanctions on the Soviet Union, preventing them from trading for more food, or, you know, selling their own goods for money, which could be used to buy more food or produce more food. Yeah. Oh, sanctions. Curious if you ever catch any videos by This Is Revolution podcast. I've not heard of them. Sorry, I need a little guitar break. Can you play the East German national anthem? I wish. The upper Midwest will soon be a socialist state. Communism has a deep history around the Great Lakes factories and mines. Darn right, I love to hear it. Solidarity. Got to organize those mines and those workers in the Midwest, and even those workers who have had their manufacturing or factory jobs outsourced, who have had their towns deindustrialized. Yeah. What's really sad is a lot of places that have been deindustrialized, where the Western capitalists have outsourced people's manufacturing jobs, mostly in the Rust Belt around the Midwest where I'm from. A lot of those places have been hit the hardest by the opioid crisis. So people lose their jobs and then they turn to opioids, and then the opioids are addictive. But eventually they don't have enough money to afford the opioids, and they turn to a cheaper alternative, heroin. Heroin, that is largely produced or made out of opium in Iraq, that was previous to the U.S. retreat from Iraq, being sold and produced by, you know, the U.S. military or people deep or closely connected to the U.S. occupiers, and not Iraq, Afghanistan. Why'd I say Iraq? Damn it. Afghanistan. Oh, by the way, thank you all for sticking around while I jam. But for those who are interested in martial arts or MMA, mixed martial arts, the UFC, I now have an MMA podcast, which is, I just today got it on Spotify and Apple Music and, all of that. Or I'm gonna get it. I'm in the process of it. I've almost got it. I just checked it now and I don't actually have it done yet. But if anyone's into MMA, we've been talking a lot, Carlos and I, or we have talked a lot. And we actually talked to the people at Means TV about this. I don't know if people know Means TV. They're like a co-op socialist media outlet. But we had an idea to do like a Marxist sports show, like, a Marxist analysis of sports or whatever, entertainment. And we just didn't have enough time or resources to do it, and it kind of fell through. But I always liked the idea. And then my buddy, who is a huge MMA fan, UFC fan, wanted to do a podcast. And I'm like, can I talk about socialism and Marxism? He's like, of course. And then I'm like, all right, let's do it. So, we have like a Dana White roast of the week here, where I basically talk about capitalism and how the UFC is just an example of capitalism, and Dana White is just a personification of capital. But then we also analyze the fights, right? Like, we also analyze the fun stuff, the non-theory stuff. So if you're into that or into socialism, check it out. Midwestern Martial Arts. I'm going to be promoting that a little more going forward. There you go. You guys should do a podcast about the mayor of Kiev. He was a good boxer, to be honest. We should do a podcast about any of the combat sports athletes who have been involved in the conflict in Ukraine. Vladimir Klitschko, world champion boxer, was literally one of the leaders in the right-wing, or one of the right-wing parties who led the overthrow of the government in 2014, or supported it, or supported the Euromaidan coup in the U.S., the U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine. Like, if you watch Ukraine on Fire, this Oliver Stone documentary about what the U.S. did in Ukraine and the U.S.-backed coup, Vladimir Klitschko, they're like bringing him out during the Euromaidan protests. All these Ukrainian people are in the street, and Klitschko, the world champion boxer, is coming out and talking to them, saying, keep protesting. The U.S. is going to keep sending us resources. Like, let's keep going. We need to fight against tyranny and implement a more fascist government. So they use like the combat sports athletes in Ukraine so much as propaganda tools. Including like the world champion, who's a higher up in a political party. And that's not super uncommon. Manny Pacquiao is a politician. It's not super uncommon in the East anyways. Manny Pacquiao is a politician. Alexander Karelin, probably the greatest Greco-Roman wrestler of all time, was a politician. It's not like the U.S. where a wrestler talking about politics is very rare. So a lot of the combat sports athletes are involved in government, or at least being used as propaganda. And Ukraine has a long history of combat sports. They have good boxing, pretty good wrestling, good MMA as well. So Ukraine on Fire is excellent. Watch if you haven't, and show your peers and family. Yeah, I showed Ukraine. That's funny you say that, because I don't usually make my roommates watch too much that's political. I'll share with them my opinions every once in a while, or if it comes up, some of them more than others. But I made all my roommates watch Ukraine on Fire, and I made my family watch Ukraine on Fire. I was like, this is what's actually going on here, y'all. Don't believe your freaking media. Tito began the non-aligned movement, which looks a lot like multipolarism. Yeah, did anyone see Samira Khan? Who, I don't know if y'all know her. She's like someone who just loves attention on Twitter, basically. Samira tweets like 700 times a day. I'm pretty sure she's just glued to the app. But Midwestern Marx published an article calling for another non-aligned movement. Saying we need a return of the non-aligned movement and multipolarity. And this non-aligned movement should include China. Right. And just it was basically saying it should be countries who aren't aligned with like the UN itself, or NATO, or all these organizations which are supposed to be, global international peace organizations, but are actually just arms of the US empire. Right. This article argued that they should form, or countries should form, a non-aligned movement against the US empire. And China should be part of it. Right, China should be part of this non-aligned movement because they are really the focus of the U.S.'s, the U.S. empire's attacks. Russia is helping China, and they're developing themselves economically, which the U.S. doesn't like. But China's a Marxist-Leninist country, they're the fastest growing economy on earth. They've defied all the U.S.'s regime change efforts. That is who the U.S.'s new Cold War is targeting. So China should join together with all these countries officially, politically on the global stage, and form a non-aligned movement. And Samira Khan said that was fence-sitting liberalism. She said that it was disgusting of us to publish that article calling for a non-aligned movement because the U.S. was attacking China and we should stand behind China. And if you listen to my explanation of what the article was about, you're probably like, what the hell was she talking about? Well, she didn't read the article. She thought we were calling for a non-aligned movement that goes against both the U.S. and China. But we were calling for a non-aligned movement with China in it. But the tweet's still up, even after getting called out about it. It's still up. And then she blocked us and then recently attacked one of our writers, Kayla Pop, because Kayla Pop said Samira Khan's obsessed with attention, which is true. Samira Khan is obsessed with attention. She's a lot more obsessed with attention than she is about spreading any kind of Marxist education or theory, or anti-imperialist, honestly. And Samira Khan responded by just calling our author like fat and ugly. I'm like, oh, what a way to defend yourself intellectually, Samira. That's like what mean girls do in high school. Oh, you called me out on something that's true? Well, you're fat and ugly. Nice. At least I don't spend all day on Twitter. Debate Samira, I would. China is pro non-aligned movement right now. Yeah. That's cowardice to say that. She wrote a piece about my party too. Also didn't read our article. Yeah, if there's anybody on the sort of anti-woke, left or whatever you call it, I don't even want to say that because if there's anybody on the sort of anti-imperialist left, I won't even say anti-woke left. If there's anybody on the anti-imperialist left, because obviously imperialism has co-opted identity politics and wokeism. So to be anti-imperialist on some level, you can't be just totally pro-identity politics, but yeah, the CIA is awesome because they have, more transgender CIA agents or more CIA agents of color, right? It's still an imperialist apparatus. If anybody on like the anti-imperialist left who's really come to prominence and popularity recently is like controlled opposition, or is just trying to sow dissent and get people angry and break up the anti-imperialist left, it's her. I guess I say anti-woke because I think, a lot of the synthetic leftists, a lot of the so-called leftists who are actually saying, no, we need to support the CIA because, they have more people of color. The people actually pushing those ideas, I think that a lot of those are actually controlled opposition for sure. Or at least being boosted and astroturfed by State Department accounts or State Department, by the State Department. But if there's people on the opposite side of that who are, combating that and saying, oh, these woke lefties are the worst thing ever. I hate them way more than, even far right conservatives, even, and they're the worst thing ever. And we should support far right conservatives against them. And all I'm going to do is criticize people and try and stir up controversy without even reading their articles, without even engaging in their arguments. Like that's stuff that the controlled opposition does. And that stuff Samira does. So if anybody on like the anti-woke, anti-imperialist left, quote unquote, is controlled op, gotta be her. Have a Yugoslavia debate in the chat. All right. I want to do something quick. All right, I'm gonna head out for now, y'all. But we're gonna raid Left Flank Vets. This is our first raid. So thank you for hanging out. Thank you for supporting the show. Patreon.com/Midwestern Marx if you want to support financially. But obviously, don't have to do that. Please don't do that if you don't have the means to. But thank you for your support. Liking, commenting, subscribing, all that stuff is more than enough. Helps the channel grow. Love you all. Keep organizing and educating. Let's raid our homie Left Flank Vets. Ready to raid in 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, What? Raid now. Do we do it?